What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto discovered the forbidden seduction seal? That made women obsessed with him. If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. 1 year ago, bones breaking, glass shattering, and the sound of a whistling kunai being thrown could be heard in training ground 4. It was dark outside, with the only source of light being the reflection of the moon and the shimmer of stars across the large blanket of space called the sky. One would think it would be a night of romance or peace. That, however, was not the case for one Naruto Uzumaki. It had been a couple years since he had received his role as the village lightning rod of hate and misery. When his existence had been announced, there was no immediate reaction from the village. The first stage was shock. In their minds, the villagers truly wanted to believe that the Kyuubi was gone forever, and would no longer be a threat. They wanted to erase the tragedy from their minds and move on with their lives. However, this proved difficult when you hear that the fox who plagued their minds was not only alive, but sealed into the child before them. The fourth Hokage began his speech on how the child should be viewed as a hero for holding back the Kyuubi. His words, however, were for naught. The general populace could only recall the deaths they were faced with, the loss of one of the previous Hokages, and the sacrifices of many shinobi who gave their lives to defend their own. There was only one thing visible in their eyes at that time, that Minato Namikaze knew would appear despite anything he said. It saddened him, and only made him feel more guilty for agreeing to Danzo's proposition. Hate, an untold amount of hate could be felt. It was radiating from their body, giving off a heat of negativity that even a clueless child could feel. As Minato glanced toward the wrongly victimized Uzumaki, he saw nothing. If the young Uzumaki was afraid or intimidated, nothing was shown through his facial expressions or body language. It made Minato frown at the thought of how a child so young was capable of holding themselves as a seasoned shinobi. It made him ponder what methods Danzo used to train someone to be like this. Following the announcement, the effect was immediate. Wherever Naruto would walk, he received the coldest of glares and gazes of hate that would burn any man where he stood. For Naruto, however, he continued to ignore these subtle, or not so subtle, acts of discrimination and journeyed his way to his apartment. This sequence of events had continued for months. For months, he received glares and unfair treatment when requesting services, possessions, or other goods needed for survival. He would be victim to countless indirect messages of hate through graffiti on his walls, destruction of property, and even had his home invaded a number of times. It was a good thing he kept all his possessions within blood seals, or it would have been robbed blind. While ignoring the hate of the citizens may have seemed like a good idea, it only served to irritate them and despise him more. But what was he to do? He was ordered to not act against the villagers. He did not have the strength to resist Danzo, yet. So, he decided to suffer silently, biding his time and growing in strength until he can finally do something about his situation. Going back to the villagers, they were at wits' end on what to do with the current object of their obsession. The focal point of their negativity, Naruto Uzumaki. They wanted him to suffer. They wanted him to scream. They wanted him to feel what they felt the day of the tragedy. They wanted him to fear them. All of this was because of a simple emotion: insecurity. They did not feel safe with him around. They couldn't stand the thought that the fox still lived on inside the belly of this child. No, he was no longer considered a child. He was a demon, an omen that represented the possibility that the same tragedy will appear once more should the fox be released. Everything they have done, and everything they have been doing was out of fear. And they hated to fear the child. Some of the villagers truly believed that if they could make the fox become obedient, if they could bend Naruto to their will, make him submissive to their village, and in turn, making him nothing more than a loyal pet, to protect them and even a toy to play with when they feel a little upset. It was truly a mix of stupidity and paranoia at its finest. Then finally, some villagers had enough. They couldn't take the stoic appearance of Naruto, and wanted to see him suffer. They could no longer live in fear of a young child. If making him an outcast didn't work, then they would resort to more physical measures. This began their game of fox hunt. At first, it was light physical actions like a shove here, and a brush of the shoulder there. These actions soon evolved with their bravery. They saw that the child didn't retaliate against their actions, and decided to push things further. This also devolved into a game where who could get a reaction out of him, or who could demean him the most. It became a test of courage for the more adventurous citizens. He was slapped and spat upon, and he only turned away. He was punched and kicked, and ignored the pain in favor of something else. He was burned, stabbed, and even bitten into, yet he shirked the pain off as if they were nothing more than insects. This served only to fuel their anger. The punishment towards his body continued, and he proceeded to receive new wounds every day. Broken bones and a bloody nose. Fractured skull and drug overdose. Shattered teeth and flayed skin. Burning his body and drowning him. They tried just about every method they could, but what was strange was how fast he could heal. A broken bone that would take months to heal would only take a couple of weeks or less. They noticed that as he continued to gain more injuries, he would heal faster. It was strange and scary to the villagers. It was like he was evolving and growing stronger thanks to them. This only renewed their fear towards the young redhead, which has led to Naruto's current position. He is now tied to training pole with countless wounds sporting all over his body. Glass could be seen shattered on his face, with shards surrounding his eyes. His left arm could be seen bent at an impossible angle, and several kunai were buried deep within his legs. Before him were 3 drunkards that decided to have a little fun with the village toy. One of them was even a retired shinobi. The ex-shinobi continued to laugh with his friends as he looked at Naruto with contempt. He noticed that Naruto had yet to change expressions or even shown any hint of pain that he was dealt, which served to annoy the old man. He walked toward Naruto and grabbed him by the hair, yanking his head back to smack against the pole. He looked into Naruto's eyes and saw nothing, as was expected from the civilian populace, but still served to piss the old man off. The old man clicked his tongue in annoyance and voiced his grievances. "Hey brat, you're quite the monster, ya know that? You gotta be. Who the hell breaks an arm like you do and heals it in a few days? You're a freak kid." As he said those words, he swung his leg back and proceeded to knee Naruto where a man was most sensitive, and yelled again, "A freak." This action repeated for several moments before he stopped to look at the kid's expression and saw nothing once more. Though this time, the man seemed to laugh, "Ha. Oh god, not even this is doing it for ya kid? Are you even a boy?" The man brought his face closer to Naruto's as if to examine his features. This continued for a few moments before Naruto was able to detect something he had yet to see from any of his offenders: lust. Disgusting, thought Naruto. This useless pile of bones probably can't even get it up anymore. He must have been a lonely soul in the world of romance. Poor old bastard, just die already. You'll be doing the world a favor if you're truly this desperate, decrepit, and disgusting. Though he wanted to say these insults out loud, he wouldn't. This sick fiend disguised as an old man didn't deserve the satisfaction of his reaction. He never caved before, and this monster wasn't going to be any different from the others. Hee, you know, you really could pass for a girl right now. At this, even his friends stopped laughing and turned to face him with an expression of shock. One man yelled out to him, "Oi, you're not seriously thinking of raping the kid, are ya?" The ex-shinobi only licked his lips slightly and said, "It has been a while for me. I can't get woman like I used to. I suppose I could settle for something less. Besides, it ain't rape if the kid doesn't refuse my advances. So, what do ya say, kid? Want this old man to show ya a good time? It certainly beats the hell out of, well, getting beaten." Naruto's answer was to collect all the blood of saliva in his mouth, and launch it directly into the old man's eyes. He couldn't help but smirk at the reaction of the old bastard. The old man began to shout a wide array of new vocabulary, and once his friends helped him clean of the blood and saliva, he then yelled to Naruto, "That's it kid. I'm going to do this village a fucking favor and end you right now. Y'all wanna play rough How about I shove this kunai up your ass, then we'll see if you're as sturdy as the rumors claim." As he reached back to grab his kunai, he was suddenly stopped by a hand grasping his arm. He tried to break free, but realized he simply wasn't strong enough to resist. When he looked up, he saw a member of the Anbu holding him back. His mask showed the characteristics of a dog, and he seemed to have gravity-defying gray hair. He remained motionless until he spoke with cold words, "You're to remove yourself from the training fields immediately, or you will be having a hot night with Ibiki in the interrogation department." This served to send shivers down the spine of the ex-shinobi. He was well aware of Ibiki's skills in the interrogation department and had no desire to see him in person. If he wanted to have whatever sanity was left of him, he would do well in listening to the Anbu shinobi who had arrived. He shook off the Anbu member from his grasp and began to leave with his friends, all while muttering how the demon was lucky. As the Anbu operative watched them walk away, he turned his attention toward Naruto, who had already escaped his hold from the pole and was currently taking out the fragments of glass on his forehead and kunai that were stabbed into his leg. The Anbu op shivered slightly at the injuries, and asked Naruto, "Are you okay?" Naruto just gave him a blank look with a raised eyebrow, as if to say, "Do I look okay to you?" The Anbu op chuckled a bit at his expression. It was rare to get one from him, but he supposed that was only natural in his case. "I see, sorry for asking a silly question," chuckled the Anbu member. "That is okay, Kakashi. I kind have already figured you were clueless about anything other than your porn anyways," Naruto stated dryly. The now-named Kakashi's brow twitched a bit at the insult, but decided to let it go. He looked over Naruto's injuries and the blood he had stained the pole and surrounding dirt with and sighed. "You know, Naruto, I'm aware you were an ex-rude shinobi. So why don't you defend yourself a bit? Or at least escape from them? Shunshin is a standard technique all operatives must know, so I'm sure you do too." Naruto rose an eyebrow at that. He knew he was an ex-rude shinobi? Does that mean he knows he isn't really the Jinchuriki? No, that shouldn't be the case. The only ones who knew were the Hokage, Kushina, Jiraiya, the advisors Homura and Kaharu, as well as Danzo himself. "What's the matter? Tired of saving my ass?" Naruto spoke in a light joking tone. Kakashi shrugged at his reply, "No, but it is a little saddening, seeing how far some villagers are willing to go, simply because they can't let go of their hatred." Naruto merely brushed off the comment and continued, I look at it as a form of training. I become more patient, as well as develop myself in a new way I recently discovered." Kakashi turned to Naruto slightly surprised by his statement, "Oh? And how does getting yourself maimed to a near-death state constantly train yourself?" "I understand patience, and I will admit that compared to a certain Uzumaki I know," Kakashi quickly flashed his thoughts to a certain redhead who despised being called tomato, before returning back to his thoughts, "I think even patience should have a limit." Naruto did agree with Kakashi to an extent. He had long since lost his patience with these villagers, and grew rather tired of their constant threats and games of torture. Naruto took off his shirt and unsealed a set of bandages and medical salve from a storage seal he had on his arm. While looking over his wounds, he answered back to Kakashi while not taking his focus away from his injuries. "Well, I recently discovered something about the longevity of the Uzumaki clan. It seems that there is more to our bodies than we initially thought." Now this seemed to perk Kakashi's interest quite a bit, since a lot of information on the Uzumaki was lost with their downfall. Kushina didn't have much knowledge herself since she was sent over to Konoha at a very young age. So any information on the Uzumaki clan was bound to garner the interest of others, which in this case is a great problem. So despite how priceless the information may be and his obvious curiosity, he seemed to worry for Naruto. After all, wouldn't information like this create problems for the future of his clan? He would be treated more as an object, a tool for breeding rather than a soldier. His free will would be limited and he would be barred from forming any relationships of his own choosing. Despite how much he would like to believe that the Konoha was above those acts, he couldn't deny that desire was a strong poison. He could name a few who would do anything to take him under their wing, just to form their own Uzumaki army within the village walls. Naruto, seemingly reading his thoughts, addressed Kakashi's worries before they could develop further. "It's all right, Kakashi. In fact, keeping it a secret is pointless at this stage. My status has always been kept on tabs and my records in the hospital have already piqued the interest of Konoha's high society. It's only a matter of time before it is discovered, so it really matters not who finds out." Naruto stated matter-of-factually as he looked over his wounds once more before dressing them. "It's now or later, and you're one of the few people I can tolerate in this ignorant cesspool of a village." Kakashi only remained silent as he watched Naruto continue to speak while treating himself. He did notice that the blood stopped flowing from his more open wounds. It was always amazing to watch the young Uzumaki's regenerative ability. Naruto spared Kakashi a short glance, and with a slight upturn of the lips, he continued, "In fact, I'd rather you be one of the first few to find out. You don't seem to have any motive for getting closer to me, and you could have always ignored me, like a majority of the shinobi do. You're one of the few that actually seem." Naruto paused and looked down for a moment, before returning his focus back to his injuries, "Well, concerned for my well-being. So I think I could trust you with this much." Kakashi's eyes smiled at the redhead's praise. It was very rare to receive any. In fact, I think this may be the first time he has actually voiced out any praise to anyone, Kakashi inwardly thought to himself. "I suppose I should feel honored then?" Naruto just shook his head lightly with a small smirk, sensing the teasing tone in his voice. "Just consider it payback for your help during the hunts. Don't let a whim of mine get to your head, Scarecrow. Besides, I figure what I say may be useful for the other Uzumaki brat." Naruto replied with an equally joking tone. Kakashi merely shrugged his shoulder, knowing who he was speaking of. It wasn't hard to deduce after all. There was only one other Uzumaki child in the village, and it was the princess of Konoha and current heiress to the Uzumaki Namikaze clan, Mito. The daughter of the fourth Hokage and infamous red-hot-blooded habanero, who was known for her temper. When he and Naruto met, they would sometimes converse about random things of interest, and the topic of Kakashi caring for the infant redhead when his sensei and his wife were too busy did come up at times. Though, this was the first time Naruto brought the child up himself in conversation. He had figured Naruto would view their family less favorably, since it was Minato who ultimately subjected him to his current torment. It left him slightly confused, so he decided to voice another question for him. "Why would you concern yourself for her sake? I figured that you." Before he could finish, Naruto interrupted, knowing what he was trying to say. "You figured I would hate her? Loathe her? Despise her for the way her father sentenced me to a life of damnation and rejection?" Kakashi winced slightly at the cold, but true, words Naruto stated with a slight edge to his voice. He only nodded in return, ascertaining that Naruto's guess was indeed correct. Naruto only sighed in response. He figured he would be asked a question like this at some point, not that it was a very big deal to him. He just treated the question as a minor annoyance, but answered anyways. "While I do not hate her family, I can't say I care much for them either. Mito is where the exception lies. She is a young and innocent life. She was not the one who outcasted me, and I would be a fool to blame someone who wasn't even aware of her surroundings." Naruto stopped for a moment to bandage the area around his eye before continuing, "In fact, I would say that I genuinely care for her." The cycloptic shinobi seemed to raise an eyebrow at that statement. He hadn't known Naruto had met the child already, so it only intrigued him further to know his reasons. "Why is that the case?" he asked with genuine curiosity. Naruto only rolled his eyes at the porn-addicted shinobi. "I swear, he only uses his energy to think when it concerns his life, the life of others, or that Icha series that Perv of a Sanin writes. Though, I guess he can't be blamed too much for that. It is a unique literary work." Though Naruto wouldn't admit to it, nor would he publicly announce it, he did have a bit of an interest towards the series. For ninja purposes, of course. He wanted to be able to resist any techniques of seduction in case the situation arises, and he was currently developing a jutsu that would allow him to seduce others in similar ways. It has yet to be completed since he was picky about the transformation's appearance, but he felt that he was coming close to creating the ultimate goddess. Shaking his thoughts away from that particular subject, he decided to humor the Anbu-op with an answer. "Kakashi, first and foremost, I am an Uzumaki. I'm sure you are aware of the wool of water that we believe in? Essentially, we treat everyone in our clan as a member of our family, one we will care for and protect no matter what. Although, there are some." Naruto's thoughts trailed momentarily to a certain hot-tempered Uzumaki within the village, before regaining his words. "Exceptions to this belief, the majority of our clan members truly lived by this rule. Mito is an Uzumaki whom I have no qualms against, so naturally I will look out for her. This is especially true now that not many of us are left." Kakashi's eyes softened when he noticed that, for a moment, Naruto expressed sadness before he quickly corrected himself. There was no way to comfort someone whose clan was near extinct, and whose only surviving members have all scattered throughout the various nations. Only time and a good woman would probably be able to ease the pain, concluded Kakashi internally, having experienced the pain of loss before, one of which he still suffered from. Finding Naruto's answer to be acceptable, he remained silent. There wasn't much that could be said after a morbid subject of genocide was mentioned. He stood there in patience, allowing Naruto to recollect himself and finish his treatment. Once Naruto finished dressing his wounds on his face, he continued onto his legs where several kunai were once buried. Enough about that though. We strayed from the topic, and I was talking for quite a bit. As I was saying before, I discovered that one of the greatest things about the Uzumaki's body is our adaptability, or evolution, so to speak. Kakashi was confused for the moment, but decided to hold his questions until after he heard what Naruto had to say. And Naruto didn't disappoint. What this refers to is our ability to adapt to the changes in our environment depending on the conditions. We are like chameleons, in the sense that we change in accordance to our surroundings and living conditions. The difference being that the change of a chameleon is superficial, shallow, and is only by appearance. The Uzumaki, however, can change the structure of our bodies to adapt to whatever harsh conditions we are living in. If we live in an area that is too hot, we adapt. Too cold? We adapt. Do you see where I'm getting at? Kakashi could only nod his head dumbly as he tried to absorb this new information. While this is certainly an interesting discovery, how does this apply to Naruto's tort? Kakashi's thoughts suddenly paused at this instance. At the sudden revelation, Kakashi's eyes seemed to have widened, a fact that Naruto seemed to have caught, and sent him an impish grin of his own. It seems you understand now, my gray-haired scarecrow. Right now, I am adapting to the pain. For this to be done, my body needs to completely restructure itself to handle the pain and injuries that I am constantly afflicted with. In other words, the villagers are helping me evolve and grow stronger by constantly abusing and breaking me, and when I mend myself, I become a newer, better, stronger version of myself. I also become resistant to injuries I have experienced and heal faster, hence the shorter intervals between my recovery. It's truly a wonderful ability. Right now, I have the raw physical prowess of a chunin. And this is at 7 years old. Imagine what I could become if this continued. Kakashi was surprised to see such an excited expression on the once emotionless Jinchuriki. It drew a small smile to form on his lips. This only lasted for a moment as Kakashi was still curious about something. Do you think the other Uzumaki were aware of this ability? Naruto seemed to ponder this for a bit, before he shook his head and responded, I don't think so. This is a very gradual and passive ability in comparison to their specialty and seals. One wouldn't notice unless they underwent repeated torture like I have. I first noticed this during my root conditioning, and even then I never thought too deeply about. Kakashi nodded his head in acceptance at the answer as it did make some sense. Though there was always a possibility that another Uzumaki may have stumbled upon it before. Kakashi let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. It was too much information at one time, and realized it was getting very late. Well, I think it's time we returned to our own quarters, Naruto, so I'll see you around. And do try to stay out of trouble. I know you are the one dyeing our uniforms orange. Naruto gave Kakashi an impish grin in response, and said, I have no idea what you are insinuating. Unless you have the evidence, I don't want to hear any accusations. Kakashi only shook his head slightly, and said, You are impossible to understand, Naruto. 1 second you can be mature, and the next you can be someone like your age, a normal child. Naruto frowned slightly at his words and sighed. He turned away and prepared a shunshin to return home, but not before saying his last piece. I never wanted to be mature, Kakashi. I was made this way. Heck, I even consider myself equal to young adults in terms of maturity and intelligence. I never asked for this, it just happened. I never had a choice in life. I may appear heartless, but deep down, I want what any child his age wants. He gave one last look to Kakashi before he separated from him for the night, a home. A family, to be loved, and freedom, Naruto added to himself. He was not in a situation where he could decide his life, and that's what he wanted the most. His life was being controlled by the council, Hokage, and Danzo. Everything else was pointless until he became free, so he could find his own home, find the right woman, or women, for him, or form his own family. Otherwise, everyone he would come to care for would suffer the same fate he was in, and he felt no one should shoulder the burdens he possessed. Naruto bowed his head slightly to one of the few people he could get along with in the village, signaling his dismissal. Good night, Kakashi, it was a good talk. It's nice being able to have someone I can hold a normal conversation with. With that said, he turned away and vanished in the night, with nothing but falling leaves as evidence to his departure. Kakashi could only stare at the fallen leaves in sadness, truly feeling sympathy for the child. This world is truly a cruel one for someone so young to suffer such a fate. He can only hope there would be a change in his future, and hopefully, for the better. Flashback end. Naruto slowly opened his eyes to see he was in a ruined building without a roof over his head. The clouds were currently eclipsing the sun, staving off any uncomfortable heat he may have felt. He basked in the residue warmth and the slight chill of the breeze. It was calming, relaxing. Probably his first truly peaceful moment since, well, ever. His thoughts reflected back to the memory he just saw. A dream, huh? As Naruto recalled this past memory, light began to return back into his dull, soulless eyes. He remembered the conversations and bickering he used to have with Kakashi, as well as all the pranks he used to make the Anbu suffer from. There were other times he enjoyed as well, and other pleasant people he had met, and he can honestly say that those days definitely made him happier. If not for them, he truly may have become nothing more than a person without drive. A husk of a human being with nothing going for his life. Come to think of it, Kakashi was part of the reason why some of his emotions began to surface more often. He was also the reason why he believed not everyone in Konoha was an ignorant ass. As Naruto continued to dwell on his thoughts, he suddenly paused in his tracks. He blinked 2 times, 3 times, then proceeded to smack his forehead. It hasn't even been that long since I left the Leaf and I'm already reminiscing like I'm some old man. I'm 8, damn it, and I'll be turning 9 soon. Naruto inwardly raged how he sometimes despised his older mindset. He hated feeling like an old man. It always reminded him of that cycloptic, abusive ass he called a caretaker, putting the meaning of the term very, very lightly. Shirking his thoughts away, Naruto stood up, stretching his limbs, taking in his new appearance. He was now shirtless, as it was pointless in wearing blood-stained clothing. Though he did have a spare shirt in his seal, he felt it was a waste when the weather was beautiful out. He wore black shorts to allow more freedom of movement. But one thing that should be taken away from this sight is how he no longer possessed the wounds he had the day before. It seems all that patience has paid off. I'm positive I have healing factor that could contend with that Kyuubi kid. I look as good as new, thought Naruto as he continued to stretch until he heard something crack in his body. Ah, goddammit. Okay, maybe I am still a little sore. Even if the injury's healed, he would still feel the soreness and slight pain that came from the injury. He had an excellent healing factor, but it didn't mean that it was perfect. After continuing his morning routine for a few moments, he decided it was time to go on a scavenger hunt for Uzumaki treasures. More than anything, he wanted to know more about himself, his clan, his parents. That was always a thought that crossed his mind, but it was always pushed back, so he never agonized about it, though there were times it would crop up unexpectedly. Before he began his journey into the ruins of the village, Naruto's last thought lingered towards his family. I wonder who my parents are. It has been hours since Naruto had started his venture through Uzushiogakure, and all he saw was one of 3 things: ruins, skeletons, and more ruins. It was becoming taxing on his patience. While Naruto did seem patient when being tortured, he at least was able to see some benefit, some results. Here though, he had yet to see a sign of anything. There was nothing here. He only hoped his clan didn't destroy everything in a last-ditch effort to preserve their art from reaching the hands of foreign shinobi. He honestly wouldn't know where to go from there. While Naruto continued browsing through the ruins, he eventually came upon something other than the typical skeleton or common ruin. There were books scattered across the floor of this structure, which he assumed to be the library. At this revelation, Naruto began to grow excited. Books. How could he not be excited? They were the source of knowledge and history passed down through the ages in physical form. Perhaps amongst these books, he could even learn of his heritage. As Naruto collected the few books that were on the ground in good, readable conditions, he began to look through them, but soon began to find himself disappointed with the contents. Origami? Paper folding? Penmanship? As curious as I am to know why there is a book on origami, this is slightly disappointing. I can't believe this, I do all this searching, and all I find are books dealing with paper and penmanship? With those thoughts, Naruto chucked the book across the room into the wall. The wall cracked a little, but what caught Naruto's attention was what happened after the book rebounded off the wall. When the book landed, dust was kicked up and revealed there to be a marking. The spot that book landed, that's it. With a surprised expression, he lifted himself off the floor with renewed vigor, and went over to where the book was now located. Naruto looked the area thoroughly and studied the slight marking on the floor. Naruto brushed away the dust and ash that engulfed the floor with wind release. Great breakthrough. Though Naruto can be bright, he can be careless at times. The dust and ash blew up into the air, clouding his visions and leaving him in a fit of agonizing coughs. Cough cough asterisk, crap, I didn't really think that through. I'm getting too excited and losing my composure. What if there was a trap? What if there was? As Naruto continued to contemplate and remark his stupidity, the cloud of debris began to dissipate, revealing a large seal array. Once he was awoken from his thoughts, Naruto examined the array in shock. This is incredibly complex. I don't even know where to begin. From what I can recognize, that character has something to do with space, and this one targets a location. Is this a teleportation array? Naruto was stunned at what he saw. From what he could pick apart, he assumed that the current seal was something similar to that of a teleportation seal, something that has only been seen and used by the second Hokage, and Minato Namikaze with the Hiraishin marker. It was what made him a legend, and now he is looking at a much more complicated and advanced version than that. As Naruto continued to look through the seal, he wasn't able to understand most of it, much to his dismay. However, he was able to pick out one part that he managed to recognize. A blood seal. This restricts access of the seal to only those the creator recognized, and this ritual was done with blood. Now the question is if this blood seal is limited to the immediate family of the user, or it is a seal for all Uzumaki clan members. This was only a minor worry, however. With little thought, he could deduce that this seal was meant for all Uzumaki. After all, who would place a personal seal in a public location everyone had access to? Well, there is only one way to truly find out, thought Naruto, as he bit into his thumb to draw blood. If I am correct, then the blood needs to be marked here. With finality and confidence in himself, Naruto swiped his blood across the appropriate characters, which led the seal to start glowing. Yes, now, let's see where this leads, exclaimed Naruto, excited at the prospect of discovering himself as well as his heritage. As the light dimmed down, Naruto's presence could no longer be seen within the room. Unknown area in Konoha. Outside the walls, one could see that the village has become a much happier place since the time of the Kyuubi disaster. Buildings have been rebuilt, families were found and new ones were made. It seemed like a time of peace was beginning for Konoha. It was unfortunate that this pleasant mood that the villagers seemed to be infected with did not seem to affect one particular old man. Danzo Shimura could be seen seated in the dark expanse of his hall, where all of his root operatives would meet for directions and orders. Danzo looked over his two new prospects that seemed to have the most potential of his new batch of emotionless warriors, Fu and Torun. Not much had changed for the two orphans, other than a little growth in height and build. Fu's eyes were sharper. Torun seemed to cover himself more like a proper Aburame clan member with a black cloak, and they seemed incredibly focused on the figure before them. To them, Danzo was a deity, a being worthy of more worship than even the current Hokage. They believed the Hokage basked too much in the light side of the shinobi. True, he was known for his genocide of the Iwa shinobi during the Third Great Shinobi War, but that was done so in the public eye. There was much more to the shinobi world than combat, and it seems the meaning of the term had been lost with time. There was a time before even chakra came to be that true shinobi existed. They did not possess the miracle energy that was chakra and were incapable of performing miraculous feats like walking on water, or standing horizontally against trees. And yet, they were still good at what their kind was designed for, assassination. Once these shinobi gained power, they abandoned their philosophy to remain in the dark. They felt like gods among normal people, capable of performing feats no human would be capable of. That is what started their journey into the light. They became show-offs. Battles became contests of skill and the uniqueness of their abilities. While they retained some of their original shinobi qualities, They had long since abandoned what it meant to truly be stealthy and to remain unseen at all times. To attack from the dark leaving no witnesses. The shinobi of this age had become too soft and open about themselves, and this was a weakness. A weakness that Danzo was aware of, and willing to do anything to correct. In truth, perhaps what Fu and Torun worshipped wasn't Danzo himself, but what he represented. He was the force that protected Konoha in the dark. He was the hero that would remain unseen. He would commit atrocities for the sake of Konoha and keep them hidden away so the village itself would not suffer from his crimes. They knew Danzo was not by any means a good man. But they understood that he was a bad man with good intentions, and like it or not, his methods were what kept Konoha standing where it was today. He was the root, the foundation of the village, and would continue to protect them from within the shadows. To them, Danzo was a true cage. Snapping their focus back onto their superior, they knelt before him, prepared for anything he has to say, as if his words were the only ones that mattered in the world. With a stare that would pierce the strongest of souls, Danzo questioned his two prospects. You may raise your head, Fu, Torun. What is the status of the village? Fu slightly nodded his head in response. The village has been content lately, and construction seems to be nearing its end. Though, I would attribute most of this good atmosphere to the recent disappearance of Agent Maelstrom, sir. Danzo frowned slightly at the name. While he was indeed satisfied with the outcome of his trade-off, it was never good to lose an agent of high quality like Naruto Uzumaki was. He was skilled, powerful, quick, efficient. He was truly living up to Danzo's image of a perfect soldier. He had even thought to rein him back in once he attended the Shinobi Academy, under the guise of him being an apprentice. It was rare nowadays, but apprenticeship still existed when a ninja wanted to personally pass along their teachings to a particular person rather than a group. Danzo nodded his head in response to Fu. I see. Seated that Naruto Uzumaki is found. He was trained under Root, after all. I don't believe he is one to keel over, especially with his stubborn demeanor, stated Danzo as he recalled the most recent hunt for the Uzumaki boy. This is a perfect opportunity to bring him back into our organization while maintaining the morale of the village. They believe he is dead, so we will pretend that is the case. An Uzumaki is priceless and he could be used to forge a new generation of Uzumaki shinobi. Especially since I came upon a new discovery regarding their bloodline. It would be most fitting for my teaching methods. Danzo was of course referring to the discovery he had made in regards to the Uzumaki's adaptability. One of his agents happened upon a conversation between Kakashi and Kushina, where he asked if Kushina was aware of this trait within their bloodline. She seemed to be confused about the question and asked where this information came from. He did not mention Naruto since he did not want to betray his trust, and he didn't feel like it would be an appropriate thing to mention that one of her clan members was constantly being tortured by the village, which led to its discovery. It was a disgusting and disturbing thought, one which he didn't want Kushina to worry over and suffer from, so he merely stated he came upon the information from a mission he had ventured on a while back. If he had been paying attention to his surroundings, he would have noticed that a certain bug user under Root was listening to the conversation the entire time from the shadows. Danzo rose his hand to signal their dismissal and left them a few parting words. In a dark tone, he stated, "Find Naruto Uzumaki and bring him back into our organization. If he resists, use force. And if he proves to be too difficult, terminate him." Nothing more was said before he disappeared within the darkness. Fu and Torun merely lowered their heads and stated the only response they had for this mission, "Yes, Lord Danzo." Fire release. Great Fireball Jutsu. As the infamous jutsu of the Uchiha was called out, a stream of fire was released, forming into a large ball of flames that soared towards the direction of the sole wooden post in the area. If the post were to possess a mind of its own, it would have surely cried out in agony, demanding retribution for its fallen comrades over the past few days. They were the unfortunate victims and undeserving sacrifices to a certain young Uchiha, and the reason for their suffering was for merely being in the presence of this particular shinobi while he silently seethed and raged. The youth watched, while lost in his musings, as the training post proceeded to be engulfed in a torrent of raging flames that seemed to show no sign of ending anytime soon. It seemed to reflect the youth's state of mind and emotions at the present time. This village, how could they treat life in such a way? What wrongs could Naruto have possibly committed to deserve the torment he received? What has he done that was so deserving of death? This raven-haired youth continued to stare with his cold, onyx eyes at the post with gnashing teeth and clenched fists. His hair slightly flowing from the breeze that drifted from the release and impact of his jutsu. He wore a simple, yet familiar, high-collared navy shirt. It was a common form of wear among the Uchiha and he was no different. He had bandages taped over his forearms and shins, and wore combat shorts with a tool pouch wrapped around his right leg. His simple appearance did nothing to take away from his charm, however. His stoic demeanor, handsome appearance, and skill in the shinobi arts had left fangirls following his every step, in hopes to discover more about the mysterious pretty boy that was Itachi Uchiha. If Itachi had one fear, it would definitely be this group of individuals that seemed to show no lack of restraint in their praise and fawning over him. The constant stares from the distance that seemed to bore into his skull day to day. The pouring of accumulated saliva and drool whenever he was caught staring into space, supposedly giving off an air of mystery and brooding. Even a short glance from him was enough to get them riled up, enough to set off a chain of squealing and cheering of his various strengths and qualities. A light shiver coursed through his spine at this moment, seemingly able to detect the mention of his being and his continual torture of his fangirls. I feel like someone is discussing one of my greatest fears? Itachi thought very briefly, before returning his focus back onto the nearly charred pole of wood. He could only thank the gods that his skill was rated highly enough, so as to allow him an early graduation and entry into his current team. As the fire began to die down, Itachi began to untense his muscles and relax his facial expression, once more returning the stoic appearance he was famous for. He had long since known about the torment his late friend, Naruto Uzumaki, had suffered. Itachi knew, however, the extent of his beatings were never shared with him. Naruto would sometimes disappear for days or weeks before meeting one another again. This time, however, didn't seem to be the case. Naruto was pronounced missing in action after another hunt against him. The difference with this one was that a couple of grudge-bearing Junin also got involved. He was chased and beaten by the civilians and Junin ninja, until they seemingly had a bright idea. They took the supposed Jinchuriki away from the village towards a large body of flowing water, before dumping him in. The Junins weren't complete idiots. They knew the child wasn't the Kyuubi incarnated. That didn't mean they wouldn't take matters into their own hands to avoid another tragedy. They knew if the boy was killed, the Kyuubi would simply reform, and possibly, seek revenge against Konoha. So they kindly deported him. While there may be a chance he would have died as he was carried by the water, they doubted it would happen. Where this belief came from was uncertain. It was suspicious in fact, but they merely pleaded that they got carried away with the hunt and made a rash decision. Needless to say, they have been stripped of rank and took a trip to the T&I department for a good period of time. They were prohibited from rejoining the shinobi ranks, due to losing a powerful weapon, and possibly releasing a future threat to the village. While Itachi knew Naruto was strong, he knew that he wasn't at the level of competing against Junin quite yet. He released a long breath in an attempt to calm himself before returning home. He did not want to be questioned on his mood and refused to bother his parents with his worries. He usually had Shisui or Naruto for those kinds of things, but the lacking presence of said shinobi, and one of the people he knew that could be called a true friend within the village, seemed to be the cause for his most recent distress. When his thoughts were directed toward the young Uzumaki, he smiled as he recalled when they first met. It was some time after the birth of his brother and Kyuubi incident that they met, and he had already started attending the academy. It was one of the bigger moments in his life even until now. Flashback. 2 years ago, our favorite Uchiha prodigy could be seen in the woods presently, training his technique and accuracy in kunai throwing and trajectory control. With closed eyes, he takes in a large breath. In his moment of pause, the sound of the wind breezing through the leaves and the chirping of smaller animals could be heard. This moment, however, lasted for only a few seconds before the child opened his eyes once more. As a clear demonstration of his determination and skill, he flung his kunai into multiple directions. Some bounced and reflected off one another with an audible clang of steel, while others found their place in the target more directly. The sound of contacting steel and whistles in the wind all ended under a couple of seconds, with all of the thrown kunai reaching the otherwise impossible targets he had displaced among the trees and earth. Taking a final look at the status of the targets, he finally released the hold he had on his breed, taking in the fresh air of nature. It was a moment of peace, when he found that he needed with the chaos that seemed to envelope his mind as of late. That was when he heard a whistle of awe among the trees. I was being watched? How did I not sense them? Itachi mused momentarily. Before he decided to act upon his concerns for the mysterious spy, he heard the voice speak from behind a nearby tree. I suppose it's true what the rumors say about you being a prodigy. That's not a skill someone your age usually has. But, I suppose as an heir to the clan, there is some pressure to be the best. As the voice completed his sentence, he stepped out into view to reveal a curious-looking red head with what appeared to be whisker marks. He was a youth slightly taller than himself with a smirk on his that seemed to display a mischievous nature. He wasn't someone he knew personally, but he had seen him around the village. His name was well known after all, considering the announcement of him being the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Itachi was never one to judge someone's character by something out of their control. From the looks of it, he was around his own age and didn't seem to have any ill intentions. After a moment, he untensed his muscles a bit and moved into a more relaxed and welcoming stance, so as to not put the unexpected visitor on guard. You are Naruto Uzumaki, Jinchuriki of the Nine-Tailed Fox. May I ask what brings you here? Itachi stated in a stoic tone of voice most of his peers would view as off-putting, but Naruto didn't seem to mind as he simply shrugged his shoulders in return. Well, there isn't much to do in a village that basically hates your guts, so I decided to venture around. They tend to keep away from wooded areas for the most part now, since that incident at the Forest of Death. Naruto stated, shaking his head side to side in an obvious bid to showcase his sarcastic and mocking tone. Those poor bastards. Well, persistence is not necessarily a bad quality, but I guess it can sometimes come with a price. Theirs just happened to be a cave of oversized bears. Compliments to the Anbu though. They must have a really fast response time if they were able to arrive before anyone was eaten or killed. If the casual dismissal of possible death seemed off-putting to Itachi, it didn't show in his expression or body language. In fact, he felt that if someone was willing to perform such degrading acts of assault and battery towards a child, they should be prepared for any repercussions. Itachi didn't seem too interested in the topic, as it was known to quite a number of villagers, so picking this information up wasn't too difficult. He dismissed the topic to voice another question to the, unbeknownst to him, false Jinchuriki. I see. May I ask why you chose to reveal yourself only now? He stated while standing with his arms to the side. He didn't think the Uzumaki came to threaten him in any way, so he adopted a comfortable position. Naruto seemed to ponder for a moment, then ultimately just shrugged his shoulder once more before responding. I was just curious about your skill and didn't want to interrupt. You also seemed to be trying to take your focus off of something, so I just let you brood for a bit until you sensed me. Itachi only nodded in response. Indeed, his mind tended to wander on various subjects of life and death. He wanted to understand many things. Like what a shinobi is. What is a village? It boggled him constantly, and he tended to lose focus of his surroundings when he had such habits. It was a habit he had difficulty in correcting and knew it was something that needed to be mended before working as a shinobi. Distractions only lead to death, something he was more than familiar with during the Third Shinobi World War. Naruto seemed to pick up on his brooding mood once again and decided to say something to correct it. Hey kid, you shouldn't be so depressed all the time. You're sure to get wrinkles by the time you're a teenager if you do. Itachi seemed to wake up from his words, and merely nodded in response. He figured Naruto wouldn't be in the way while he continued to train, so he walked over to his kunai that had burrowed into their targets, and proceeded to remove them from their positions back into his tool pouch. While he was reaching for one of his kunai, he stopped for a moment. He thought of something as he turned to Naruto and asked him a question related to his constant troubles. Uzumaki, have you? Before Itachi continued, Naruto swiftly interrupted to correct him. Naruto, just call me Naruto. I already have a mindset of a geezer. I don't need to be referred to like I am one as well. We're the same age, so treat me like a kid. Although Itachi found it contradictory and ridiculous that Naruto didn't want to be viewed as a geezer, yet called him a kid, he just nodded his head before continuing. Naruto, have you seen the reality of war? Naruto, seeing where the conversation was heading, nodded his head and answered back, You're referring to the Third Shinobi World War, huh? Naruto paused until he received a slow, but near imperceptible nod from Itachi before continuing. I see. Well, what is it you wanted to ask? I'm sure it's what has been bugging you, and asking whether or not I had experienced the tragedies the war brought is not the actual reason, so go ahead. I'll listen. With the last of kunai picked up off the ground, Itachi turned to Naruto fully before answering. I will admit that war has caused me unending thoughts about what it means to be a shinobi. What it means to be a part of the village, but what I wanted to ask was, what is a life to you? Naruto sighed audibly at the rather difficult question. It was one that could have many answers, with none being quite correct. He too had thought about this during his days en route, but ultimately came upon one conclusion. It was not a solid one, but it would hold until he found a right one. After a couple moments of silence staring between the two, he finally voiced his thoughts. Itachi, I believe all life has meaning, it just has yet to be found. He noticed that Itachi didn't seem too satisfied by the answer, so he proceeded to walk towards him at a slow pace until he stood before him. All of the constant theories of life and death, the meanings behind a village and shinobi, they are infinite. Considering everyone in this world is unique, it is safe to assume that their thoughts will be equally unique. Not a single person is the same, there will always be a difference among beliefs, hence why I cannot give you a straight answer even if I wanted to. Whatever I believe may not fit what you believe in, and it is never healthy to force yourself to do so. At this, Itachi seemed to bow his head a little in contemplation, but before he could delve any deeper, he felt two fingers prod his forehead, pushing his gaze back onto the red head. With a genuine smile on his lips, Naruto said, "Give it time, Itachi, and I'm sure you'll find an answer." Your answer, not mine or anyone else's. The answer that is unique to yourself, and will remain so until the end of your days. Itachi, for once, smiled at the answer. He truly was overthinking such things, he would admit to that. He had time to find his answer, so there was no sense in rushing. Until then, he will perform his duties to Konoha and become the best he can be, if not for himself, for the sake of others, his parents, and his newborn brother. Seeing the look of realization and recognition on Itachi's face, Naruto slowly retracted his fingers from the Uchiha's forehead before continuing with a playful grin. Don't think too much on it, you'll only seem like a brooding brat. Isn't that why your fangirls continue to hunt you down despite any form of resistance you have? I'm starting to think that you're the kind of person that gets off on torture. Naruto chuckled when he saw the look of slight horror on the prodigy's face. I suppose everyone has some form of weakness. Hee, this is too funny. An Uchiha elite, intimidated by the mere sight of squealing girls and yipping harlots, all but begging to be in a relationship with him. He chuckled at this thought, before continuing his teasing. If you'd like, I did happen upon this one novel called Icha Icha, Bondage Heaven. It details quite the story about someone with tendencies much like yours. He began to laugh a little when he saw the once horrified expression devolve into a much more disturbed one. Itachi uncharacteristically pouted once he realized he was being teased. Being around Naruto just seemed to bring out his more childish side. It was different and pleasant, knowing he could act his true age around someone. The Uchiha brought a hand to his forehead and rubbed it slightly, remembering how two fingers were once present there. He refocused his eyes onto the culprit and asked, "Why did you do that?" Naruto stopped his short fit of laughter, seemingly confused by the question, before asking for clarification. Do what? Itachi just stared for a moment while rubbing the spot that was targeted by the Uzumaki before him, before re-specifying his curveball of a question. Why did you poke my forehead? This seemed to pause Naruto for a second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and on the fourth, he began to chuckle. And after a few more seconds, it evolved in a fit of laughter that left him hunched over and kneeling on the ground. Itachi was unamused, if the twitching of his brow was anything to go by. After a minute or two, Naruto began to calm down, and decided to explain himself to the Uchiha while wiping a tear from his eye, before said Uchiha could become too irritated. Sorry, it's just that after all the deep shit we talked about, you question why I poked you? I was certain you would question my reasoning at the very least. To be honest, I'm still surprised you're talking to me at all, if we're considering my reputation as a Jinchuriki. It was unexpected. You sure know how to keep your priorities straight, nay, Uchiha brat? Naruto finally answered with a short chuckle between words. Itachi looked visibly annoyed at the statement and decided to voice this out. You look to be around my age, so I doubt you have the right to call me a brat. While Itachi continued to look peeved, he was also inwardly happy. Happy that someone saw him as a human being rather than some prodigy so high on a pedestal, beyond the reach of his peers. If there was anyone he could get along with his age, he felt that person would be Naruto. Yeah, whatever brat. Well, to answer your question, I don't know. Naruto responded bluntly. Itachi would have face faulted if he were not so in control of himself. What is that supposed to mean? Itachi couldn't help but question the answer Naruto gave, or lack of one. Scratching his chin, Naruto said, it means what it means. I don't know, I kinda just did it on a whim, but, I guess if I had to try to explain it, I guess I wanted to try to get my message across. You know? Kind of like, projecting my thoughts and feelings onto the tips of my fingers and focus it onto the whirlpool of emotions that was twisting and turning inside of that head of yours. Itachi, unknowingly recontinued his previous ministrations on his forehead, as if to try to understand the feeling. Rather than a technique, I guess it was an act of faith? Faith that you would understand what I meant through contact. Faith that we could understand each other through that one moment of contact. Through this conversation, I felt you and me were similar in some ways, so I believed it would work. So, tell me, did it? Naruto finished with a cheeky grin. Itachi thought about it for a moment. It was a simple physical interaction, but it seemed endearing in a way. Almost as if he could connect Naruto with himself, understand him, and it seemed to send a signal of care? Sympathy? Of what? He wasn't sure, but he definitely felt more relaxed and calm after the act. Releasing a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, he spoke back, yes, I think it did. There was a moment of silence, before another voice spoke up breaking it. It was another Uchiha youth that Itachi seemed to recognize. That's some deep stuff you guys are talking about. I definitely wouldn't have thought there were kids your age that would look so deeply into things. The new entry spoke in a light-hearted tone. Slow in response, but still questioning the presence of his senior, Itachi answered first, Shisui? What are you doing here? The boy merely chuckled in response before answering, I think that's a question better left for you too. Aren't you supposed to be in the academy? Naruto, whose only response to the unexpected entry of the Uchiha was nothing more than a raised eyebrow, only shook his side to side. Not for me. I'm not even enrolled, courtesy of our fantastic council, who believed I would only become a threat if I received proper training. Naruto said in a sarcastic tone in regards to the council. While some protested the decision, feeling that a weapon should be sharpened and honed as the perfect means of deterrence against villages, a majority felt more safe if Naruto did not learn any methods of killing, in fear of any revenge he may exact upon his civilian offenders. Little did they know he still trained in secret and had already received high-quality lessons from being with Root, if you considered mentally and physically debilitating torture training. Shisui only chuckled nervously, knowing how the village pariah was treated. He did not feel the same way as others but was powerless to do anything. He then turned his focus onto Itachi, who shook his head as well, denying the fact. I'm not missing lessons either. He stated confidently, knowing he had a shadow clone taking his place. Naruto seemed ponder his answer for a moment, before nodding his head in understanding. Ah, I see. You used shadow clones? I love that technique. It has so many uses. Naruto expressed vocally. He was familiar with the technique, and it really was among his favorites. It served many purposes in training, and he could spam more than the average shinobi due to his Uzumaki heritage having naturally larger chakra reserves. If he was the actual Jinchuriki, he was certain that he could spam possibly thousands of copies, but since that wasn't the case, he was limited to a supply from 10 to 30, varying in quality depending on how much chakra was used and how many he created. Shaking himself from his thoughts, he noticed that Shisui and Itachi were still talking and decided to join the conversation. They were both interesting people, and he felt like he could get along with them. Neither saw him as the Kyuubi and conversed with him as if he was a normal person. This continued for a while until Itachi felt his shadow clone disperse at the school due to some conflict between students. This situation was also what led to his skills being discovered by the teachers, allowing him an early graduation later in the year. Following the disappearance of his clone, the three young shinobi bid each other farewell, looking forward to another opportunity where they could possibly train together. Flashback end. Following that day, they would meet every so often to train or converse with one another. Due to Naruto's reputation, it did have to be kept a secret since they did not know how their families would react. Naruto could care less, as he just enjoyed having pleasant company for once. Itachi awoke from his reminiscence once he realized that he had trekked home from the training grounds. At the door waiting was his father, Fugaku Uchiha, who looked upon him with a proud smile. Itachi was a true prodigy within the Uchiha clan, so how could he not be proud of his own flesh and blood? He was capable of performing a wide array of jutsu, skilled in taijutsu, stealth, and various other areas of importance for a shinobi. "Welcome home, Itachi," Fugaku said with a fatherly tone. "Lunch is almost ready, so wash yourself before coming to the table." Itachi nodded in response, but before he could respond back, he was tackled by a short bundle of black hair. This child of unsuppressed joy was his younger brother, Sasuke. He loved his older brother, perhaps more so than his father and mother. Itachi had always looked after him in their parents' absence, and genuinely cared for him. If there was someone Sasuke felt he could trust, it would naturally be his older brother. "Itachi," shouted the ecstatic little Uchiha. "Can we play today? I'm so bored, please." As if to express his eagerness, the little Uchiha jumped repeatedly up and down while holding Itachi down in an iron hug. Itachi could only smile solemnly and with regret. "Sorry Sasuke, I have a mission after lunch. Maybe another day." Sasuke deflated quickly hearing these words, before he felt a familiar set of fingers press against his forehead. He never understood why, but he always felt warm and safe whenever Itachi did this. "Please understand Sasuke, and forgive me. I will surely make time for you another day," Itachi inwardly mused, hoping he got the message across. Sasuke's deflation lasted for only a moment, before he smiled once again at his favorite brother. "Okay, but you promised. Now you have to play with me next time," the little Uchiha rebutted firmly. Itachi, Fugaku, and now their mother Makoto, who had appeared sometime during the conversation, could only laugh at the young Uchiha. Breaking everyone from their thoughts, Makoto clapped her hands to get their attention. "Okay everyone, I've already finished dinner, so come wash up before you eat." With that said, the small family made their way into the house, but not before Itachi sent a pondering glance to the sky behind him, with his last thought being about his red-haired friend. "I hope you are well, Naruto." Uzushiogakure Underground Tunnel Network. All-encompassing darkness was all that existed in this hidden underground chamber. The walls were aged as proven by the growing plantation and large stretch of cracks and crevices among the walls and floors. It appeared fragile and ancient, almost as if it would collapse with a small shock or quake. To the knowledge of no one, these walls have stood for generations, dating back to an era even before the First Shinobi World War, and perhaps even older. Despite its appearance, it had remained sturdy and strong, having stood against the strongest of quakes and turbulent storms. The room itself was a marvel of history, one of which many would give their life to examine. A remnant of time, left only to decay out of reach from the rest of the world. The walls were riddled with seals and markings of ages past that perhaps even the great Jiraiya and Minato Namikaze would be hard-pressed to even read such ancient writing and scriptures. What these seals represented remained unclear, and perhaps would remain so for a long period of time. Within this huge expanse of darkness, light suddenly began to illuminate in the center of the chamber. Seals began to glow as a familiar figure appeared within. This figure was none other than Naruto Uzumaki. And as quickly as the light came, it had disappeared with a low hum that echoed in the room, seemingly to signify that a set of seals had been activated once more. This left the lone figure with nothing to see but a blanket of black, a darkness so deep his own hands were invisible to his sight. The room, void of sound and furnishings, entered an eerie silence. There was more to this room than meets the eye, something Naruto seemed to realize. For once in the entirety of his journey into Uzushiogakure, he felt fear. This fear did not come from his lack of visuals, however. The seals that littered the room was far more complicated than that and capable of much, much more. "What is this?" Naruto thought with a cold sweat dripping down his spine. "I can't feel anything. There is nothing." What Naruto was experiencing was a technique beyond the capability of anyone that was still living in the world. An ancient sealing jutsu called Sensory Void Prison, also called SV Prison for short in the past. It was a technique that struck fear into the hearts of all who heard of it and even more to the ones who were possessed by the technique. The markings on the walls and floor turned the natural five senses of anyone inside into nothing. An ever-present darkness was all that clouded their vision. All formations of sound was silenced. Taste became nothing and scent was non-existent, and though it was possible to move, the body was numbed of all feeling. Not a touch could be sensed and pain was ignored. Your mind knew it was moving, but your body never felt the actions that took place. It was an absolute prison of the void, taking away the tools all humans used to be aware. It erased what made humans aware of their surroundings and themselves. It blocked out all sources a human used to gather information and experience in their lives. It was a torture to the human mind, for it was capable of leaving any human being with only one feeling: helplessness. You would be left with nothing but your thoughts, which only served to aid your misery. With your whole being taken from you besides your own ability to think, you would constantly be tortured by the loss of your senses, living in fear of becoming nothing as well. As if sensing the distress of the boy, the seals began to brighten once more, forming a path of glowing symbols and characters, as if directing the child. Naruto, taking a moment to calm down and try to assess the situation, watched the seals glow with a wary gaze. While I can't say this isn't suspicious, I don't have much else to work with. This emptiness is terrifying. Naruto tried performing a simple night vision technique or illumination jutsu, but both seemed to fail as well, leaving him even more nervous than before. Shit, he would have hollered if he had been able to make a sound within the void. The seals must be blocking me from projecting chakra outwardly. Naruto's assumption was correct. The seals limited access to one's chakra once they were caught. While it would continue to circulate inside one's body, they would be unable to eject it in order to perform any techniques and jutsu. It also disrupted the flow of chakra, making one incapable of focusing chakra into specific body parts. This made tools like the Byakugan, Sharingan, or any technique that was affiliated with the body useless and impossible to activate. Limited in choice, Naruto took a step onto the path of glowing seals and noticed the immediate change in the environment. He was able to see again. He could feel the motions of his muscles. All of his senses had returned to him, and he was finally able to make out the appearance of the dreary chamber. A bypass seal, Naruto whispered to himself before he continued to follow the path out of the chamber, and into a network of rooms and tunnels. I suppose I don't have much of a choice but to follow the path. There is no way I want to feel, whatever that was again. Determined to continue, and with that final thought, Naruto followed the suspicious path of glowing seals out of the chamber into the labyrinth. It was hours before Naruto found himself standing before a large set of doors. The curious thing was that these set of doors looked no different from the ones he had passed before, with the exception of glowing seals. I see, Naruto mused in revelation as he continued to examine the ceiling matrix that seemed present on every inch of the walls and floors when he was moving through the maze. As daunting and horrifying the experience had left him, he understood the potential and capability of such a seal. It was dangerous, and he was all too familiar with what it did. During his journey to the doors before him, he had plenty of time to contemplate and theorize many things about the maze of seals and stone. He couldn't help but believe that the security measures that existed in this place was phenomenal and far above anything he had seen, or even heard of before, as he reflected on his studies. To think something so powerful would be used, I can only imagine what it was meant to protect. He clearly understood that whatever was meant to be protected was significant, and clearly only for the eyes of members within the clan. From what little he could make out in the ceiling matrix on the paths, it had characters for bloodline detection. This meant only those of a bloodline that had gained permission could activate the bypassing seal matrix. As for the ceiling inscriptions that manifested the void, he could understand nothing. There were characters he had yet to see, and they were ordered in a manner so complex he couldn't even read them. He also felt like there was something missing. It wasn't that the matrix itself was missing something, it was more like it was impossible for Naruto to see it. Until he figured out what that was, he could only be left in the dark. There is much more to the art of sealing than I thought. He had also pondered why a maze would be constructed, considering how powerful the seal that had blocked out his senses was. It simply didn't make sense at first, but he felt that he could understand the reasoning a bit. As foolproof as that seal seemed, I'm sure there must have been a way around it. From what I could gather, it was written quite detailed to cater to those senses. He began to theorize. Naruto understood that for any method and form of sealing to work, a thorough understanding was needed to perform the necessary actions. He considered very skilled in matrix comprehension and design, but he could only say that for some of the basic seals, considering Konoha was limited in resources that were related to the art. For a storage seal, you needed to have some understanding of space and containment. A blood seal was even simpler if you treated blood as the key, and the seal as the door. He had much to learn, that much he was aware, and hopefully he would by the end of his journey. This meant that if someone relied on a sense outside of the main five, there was a chance they could still move around without worry. He hypothesized. He wouldn't know for sure until he experimented with it, but first, he would need to be able to decipher it. Naruto turned his focus to the set of doors that glowed with seals he had yet to decipher. Naruto's eyes narrowed and his muscles tensed. He was unsure of what awaited him beyond those doors. It could be a trap, an unbelievable treasure trove of artifacts and valuables, or it could be nothing at all. A room void of anything with whatever had previously existed inside is nothing more than ashes in a last-ditch effort to prevent outsiders from taking anything of worth. He focused his gaze onto two blood and chakra input seals, both being set on the opposite sides of the door. The seal he had recognized was clear to him. It was the Uzumaki clan symbol. When he turned his attention to the other one, it was a symbol he did not recognize. It appeared to be two squares overlapping the other with the one on top offset a bit to the bottom left corner. Strange, what does this stand for? Naruto pondered in confused frustration. Considering the symbol next to it represents my clan, does this mean there was a branch clan of the Uzumaki? Or did they house another clan much like Konoha does? Naruto's thoughts continued in this manner for a period of time, only ending up with more questions and headaches than he did answers. If there was another clan, how come they hadn't been mentioned before? What happened to them, and where are they now? He continued his thoughts in silent frustration. There's too much out in the open for now. Naruto, forcefully ending his series of questions and unsated curiosity, bit into his thumb, drawing blood. For now, let's just see what happens for the first one. With that lingering thought, he swiped his blood over the symbol of the Uzumaki and placed his hand over it, releasing chakra. Upon this action, the symbols and characters began to glow red, but other than that, nothing had happened. Naruto could only let out a small breath of disappointment as he looked to the other symbol. I guess both need to be activated simultaneously for anything to happen, but I'm not even sure if I would be able to. There was a great chance he could suffer from a powerful seal rejection. The repercussions that came with seal rejection varied on complexity of the seal. If Naruto had a scroll with a blood seal stolen from him and it was forcefully unsealed, at best it would generate a small explosion, thereby blessing the offender's hands and arms with second or third degree burns. With a seal this complex, the whole building might collapse, crushing his entire body and leaving his existence as nothing more than a memory. Buried with him would be whatever treasure lied beyond the door, never to be found by another ever again. Despite the inherent risk, Naruto had already made his decision. He was determined to find whatever this thing of value was, and was willing to give his life for it. He understood that there would be some who would be sad for his death, but he simply couldn't let this opportunity pass. He was an Uzumaki, and they were individuals stubborn down to their blood and bones. It was their inherent nature, and while he wouldn't be as pronounced in this behavior like most Uzumaki were, it did not mean he still didn't possess this trait. It was only subdued thanks to Danzo's training, allowing him more control of his actions. He had come so far already, and he was not willing to turn back. The truth behind his heritage was always a question of concern for him since he was given a book on the Uzumaki by Danzo. He knew Danzo was never one for charity and he had reasons for giving the book to him, reasons he was aware of the moment it was handed to him. The book was small and protected by a seal that would only allow the eyes of an Uzumaki to bear witness to. There was not much in the small book, but it did mention some legends and history of their clan. It mentioned their belief in the will of water, and what it entailed, as well as what they were famous for. Unfortunately for him, and much to Danzo's disappointment, there were no passages that went more in depth into seal construction and design. Perhaps they existed once within the torn pages, but there was no way to tell now. He had to thank Danzo for such a generous gift though. Before he had received the book, he had been in a dark place, with various circumstances fighting against him. He truly was close to becoming the emotionless husk Danzo had always desired, but it had changed the moment he received that book. The book became a hope and dream for him. He had always lived within the confines of Root, only seeing the light of day a few times, and that was during a mission. It was before the armistice of the Third Shinobi World War, so there was plenty of chaos and bloodshed to go around, something Itachi could attest to. It was the source of his trauma and desire for peace after all. The will of water was a belief in freedom and family, things he did not have and most desired. Rather than sit back and hope for the day to come, he would plow his way through with a will that would put most veteran shinobi to shame. It was a stubbornness capable of contending with the temper of Kushina Uzumaki. A fire had been lit in his eyes that day as he continued to read the legends and tales of his clan. He would fight for his freedom to his last breath, and that was a promise of a lifetime. I don't plan to leave this place empty-handed. Naruto took a deep breath before biting into his other thumb, drawing blood once more. I can only hope they were connected to my family in some way. Well, here goes everything. With that last thought, performed the same action he did the other seal. For a moment, there was nothing, until the seal began to glow blue. For a moment, he was ecstatic that he had succeeded, until he felt that he couldn't remove his hands from the seals. The problem began when Naruto began to feel a strong pull on his chakra network. The seal was quickly draining him of his chakra, which would normally not be an easy feat for an Uzumaki. Somehow though, the door seemed to drink his chakra faster than a human could swallow water. At this point, Naruto was cringing in pain, heaving for air as he felt the strain on his chakra network. He was losing too much, too fast, and he could feel every bit of it. This continued to worsen as the two seals then began to expand their light across the door, tracing each character and symbol. As the complexity of the sealing matrix grew and the light stretched across, so did the amount of pain Naruto felt. Damn it, Naruto screamed in his head. He was experiencing a pain he had yet to experience before. He was used to tolerating physical pain, but never had he felt something like this. His chakra network was getting attacked directly, devouring whatever chakra his tenketsu points had flowing down to the last drop. This was worse than any technique a Hyuga would be capable of tenfold. Chakra was a combination of physical and spiritual energies, used in conjunction to create miracles that would otherwise be impossible for a normal human. So it wasn't just physical pain he was feeling, he felt like his soul itself was going to be devoured. This was almost the exact opposite of what he felt when his senses were blocked. Pain coursed through every inch of his body. He could hear a sharp ringing in his ears that managed to make them bleed. He had tears of blood streaming from his eyes as he witnessed the happenings on his body and the door with tunneled vision. His tongue was numbed from the pain, and he could smell the iron of the blood pouring from the orifices of his body. Fuck this? I'm not going to be killed by some fucking door? Naruto had all but yelled out his determination to resist the pull on his energy. As if reading the Uzumaki's determination, the markings began to glow in a bright flash of white, blinding Naruto and lighting the darkness of the labyrinth. Once the light died down, Naruto began to feel the door creak open with the weight he had pressed against it. When it had opened fully, Naruto had stumbled in with short staggered steps. His knees were weak and everything else felt completely drained. Naruto knew he was on his last legs, but he had to see if this was worth the effort and pain he suffered. What he saw before him was an ancient-looking pedestal with two scrolls over it. They seemed to float above the pedestal, as if to demonstrate their value as some sort of divine item. The one to the left-hand side was a black scroll with his clan crest in white over it, while the other was a white scroll with the crest he had yet to discover in black. Naruto let out a short, strained chuckle. Between panting breaths, Naruto spoke to the scrolls as if they could understand him. "Hey, I really hope you were worth it." With those last words spoken, Naruto collapsed forward, slipping into a silent state of unconsciousness. Konohagakure, Hokage's office. With an exasperated sigh, a blond man could be seen seated behind a desk riddled with papers and scrolls. This man was none other the fourth Hokage and the infamous Yellow Flash, Minato Namikaze. He was now struggling with an opponent that seemed to bring nothing but endless torture of boredom, and it was a fight that was passed down from his predecessors before him: paperwork. Hearing a knock at the door, Minato turns his attention away from the hell that was paperwork in favor of another job, a distraction, anything but the endless abyss and torture that was paper. "Come in," he stated simply while staring at the remaining stacked nightmares that needed to be processed. He could only thank the gods that there was no such thing as a paper jutsu. They would become the public enemies of any cage or high official if their existence were to be known. He may have a heart attack just from seeing a jutsu like that in action. A mega cure tower. Achoo! A light and subdued sneeze could be heard within the dreary tower of the rain village. The source of which the sneeze came from was a blue-haired figure garbed in a black cloak with red clouds. She was above average in height for a woman with piercing amber eyes, lined with lavender eyeshadow. Below her lip was a piercing, and adorning her hair into a bun was a large, light blue paper flower. Her nails were dressed with orange polish and she wore a ring with the kanji character for white on her right middle finger. She brushed her nose lightly in response to her sneeze and thought to herself, "Strange, I do not feel sick nor have I been sick for a while from what I can recall, how curious." Quickly getting over her curiosity from the unexpected bodily action, she proceeded down the hall to report her most recent mission to the leader of her village. He was impatient, and things became difficult when he was irritated, especially when it concerned their search. She could only hope he won't be too disappointed with the results. A shiver suddenly went down the blonde Hokage's spine for a moment before he regained his posture. That was strange, he thought. It was almost as if I just jinxed myself. Before Minato could continue his pondering, his attention changed gears the moment a cough was heard. In front of him were two red heads that he was all too familiar with and happy to see. The first figure was the red hot-blooded habanero of the leaf and his wife, Kushina Uzumaki Namikaze. She wore a simple green loose-fitted dress over a white high-collared blouse. Her attire, though, did nothing to hide her slender figure and beauty. She had long red hair that came down past her waist, with two shoulder-length strands that framed the sides of her face and over her shoulders. Her skin was fair, and her violet eyes had a mesmerizing shine to them. Unless you were a victim to her fury in the past, you would see her as nothing more than a model of a woman. Beside her was the daughter of the two, and true Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, Mito Uzumaki Namikaze. She was a carbon copy of Kushina in appearance for those that had seen her in her youth. Her temper was equally similar, though a bit more subdued due to the more collected nature of Minato. The only difference from her mother that could be noticed is that her hair seemed a bit more untamed like her father's, and her eyes radiated a light of cerulean that was easily more catching to the hearts and eyes of others in comparison to her parents. Her face was round, as was fitting for a young girl her age. This was something Kushina, however, knew would become a problem. It would definitely become the cause for a certain nickname Kushina had once been tortured by, Tomato. Despite this, she was certain to grow into a beauty of renown throughout the village, a thought that seemed to trouble her father every time he became aware of it. "She's not ready to show interest in boys yet," he pronounced inwardly. It was more of a declaration than an opinion, but he could care less though. He felt that he had the right as her father. In his mind at least. "Daddy," the young, second coming of the tomato, had all but hollered before making a blind rush to her father, glomping his chest in the process. Minato, who had already moved away from his desk to greet his family, returned her tackle with a hug of his own before picking her up and holding her in his arms. He returned her excitement with a smile of genuine happiness and love. "How are you, little Red? What brings you here?" She snuggled into his arms with a smile of her own before responding. "We missed you, Daddy, and Mama said she wanted to ask you something too, so she said we could visit." She turned her eyes to meet with her father's, before they widened with an innocent light in them and asked him, "We can be here, right Daddy?" "Oh no," thought her father with a cold sweat he felt like never before. He hadn't been this nervous since the Third Shinobi World War. She has learned, the eyes. It is probably important to take this time to explain the technique that Minato Namikaze has shown such fear towards. It is a technique that has existed through eons of time and has yet to lose in effect and efficiency. It was said to be the most overbearing of techniques in terms of persuasion, and has gone by many names throughout the ages. They have been called baby face or crocodile tears. It has more commonly been referred to as the puppy eyes, but has recently garnered a new nickname most fitting for its recent evolution in potency. It has now coined the term, the pout of power. It is a look that demands leniency and strikes someone deep into their heart, forcefully wringing out feelings of guilt and submission. It is difficult to counter simply because it compels individuals with raw innocence and cuteness, to the extent that it becomes endearing and plays the strings of one's heart like a harp, lulling them into the desired actions of the caster. It was a skill of puppetry and manipulation that would put Sasori of the Red Sand to shame. With no malice present, an individual will naturally not have their guard up to prepare themselves for such a technique. The reason why it has evolved in naming from the puppy eyes to the pout of power is because it now involves physical action and expression. This is typically done with a quivering lip or softly grabbing onto the victim with a begging clutch. The effectiveness has been known to increase tenfold when physical interaction is involved, so it was determined by professionals to best resolve anything before it had ever reached that stage. The dangerous part was that even with repeated use, the quality of its effect never dwindles. That is the horror Minato had feared and still does to this day, as every sucker for adorableness should be. It was their greatest weakness. That, my friends, is the power of the eyes. Returning our focus back to Minato, when he noticed his daughter's lip begin to quiver, he knew he had to respond, and fast. Of course, sweetheart. There is not a time of day you can't visit me. My doors will always be open for you. He responded quicker than a flash of the Hiraishin. At this, Mito gave her father a knowing look and smiled mischievously, seemingly aware of her actions, not that her father noticed. He was too focused on convincing his daughter that he cared for her and missed her equally as much. She would have to thank mommy later for teaching her. With a smile of her own, she gave her father a kiss on the cheek. Thanks daddy, I love you. Kushina, who had been watching the entire exchange, could only giggle mysteriously, knowing that she was the one responsible for giving her daughter the weapon that was the bane of every man's existence. As the conversation between the two began to die down, so too did the smile on Kushina's face. The reason for that was also the reason why she was here and wanted to speak with Minato. She initially didn't plan to bring Mito since the conversation would be pretty serious. Unfortunately, Makoto was too busy to watch over Mito for her, and anyone else she knew was either busy or away on a mission. She could only hope that Mito would not ask too many complicated questions. Minato seemed to notice the slight shift in the atmosphere around Kushina, and sent her a worried glance of his own. Kushi, is there something bothering you? Kushina turned her gaze downward for a moment, pondering on what she should say exactly. Finding the words she wanted to ask, she voiced them in an audibly soft tone only one within close proximity could hear. Do you know if there was any news about him yet? Minato frowned at the question, showcasing his own distress since he knew what she was talking about. He could only shake his head to her. Catching her look of sadness and disappointment, he tried to soothe her worries. I'm sorry, I have Anbu out there looking for him right now with Kakashi leading them. He was determined to find him too, so I know it will only be a matter of time. Kushina. This seemed to erase some of her worries, but a look of shame combined with sadness was still existent on her face. I just feel so guilty, Minato. She stated her concerns bluntly, hoping to relieve some of the stress she had been withholding for a while now. We are from the same clan, yet I abandoned him. This is not how our people were, Minato. We looked after and loved one another. This betrayal eats at me every day. With that final burst of emotion, she began to tear up. Minato had known how much torture it had been for her. She would be sleepless during the night at times, and the bags under her eyes showed how tired she truly was. Kushina was a kind person at heart and never wanted things to turn out the way they did. In a moment of weakness, Danzo had been able to coerce them into choosing their daughter over him. Sacrificing another child for their own, while it was understandable to some extent, had left a bad taste in their mouth. When they finally caught wind of the reports concerning his past incidents, they were furious to say the least. Minato, how did we not see the way he was mistreated? We knew he would suffer from neglect, but the reports said he was abused and beaten, sometimes into a bloody pulp. How could this happen? While she still had an expression of sadness and her tone was low, it was obvious she was both curious and suspicious. I understand what you're saying, Kushi. It seems some information was withdrawn from us purposely, and I have a feeling Danzo may be involved. Unfortunately, my investigation team was unable to draw anything from the case. There is also the chance that the reporters may be biased against the fox. A low sigh escaped his lips, as if to express his helplessness with the situation. There is too much going on at once, Kushina, and I'm afraid discovering anything may be a lost cause. I'm certain he is alive out there. Kushina just bit her lips at the knowledge that her fellow clan member wouldn't receive the proper justice he deserved. Though, she was at fault in the first place for falling to Danzo's poisonous words. I really hope so. Naruto doesn't deserve the treatment he has received so far. I want to at least apologize, for whatever it's worth, and do something to make it up to him. Hearing the name, Naruto, Mito, who had dozed off sometime in the beginning of the conversation, rubbed her eyes awake and seemed to jerk straight up. Wuto? She questioned while mispronouncing the name slightly. Are we going to Haven Ramen again, mommy? I really love fish cakes. Dissipating the solemn mood with her cheeriness, Minato and Kushina began to chuckle, with the latter wiping her eyes of any tears that had formed in the previous conversation. They quickly formed smiles on their faces to avoid worrying their child. I wish I could marry fish cakes. Do you think I can, mommy? Mito continued with an excited voice. At that moment, Minato seemed to freeze as his fatherly instincts seemed to kick into overdrive. No, she is talking about food, not a certain male redhead, you know, Minato. Get a hold of yourself. In a bid to stray away from the idea of marriage, Minato continued this internal conflict he was having with himself, while Kushina began to laugh a little louder at the look of horror that seemed to appear on her husband's face. If there were few things that could scare a man, one of them would be another man taking away the heart of their little girl. Oh, I'm sure you can mini me too, Kushina said with a knowing look at her husband that only seemed to amplify Minato's growing internal struggle. Mito seemed to pout at the nickname. She knew she looked like miniature version of her mom, but she didn't have to remark her height as well. It was a touchy subject for her. Kushina continued after turning her focus back onto her daughter. Sorry honey, but we weren't talking about ramen. We were talking about a boy whose name is Naruto. He's currently away from the village right now. She stopped for a moment with a sad look, before quickly correcting herself so her daughter couldn't detect it. But I'm sure you will be back. He's an Uzumaki with red hair just like you and I, and we were always known to be stubborn. She finished with a smile. Mito seemed to contemplate her words, adopting a thoughtful and concentrated look, well, as concentrated as anyone her age could be. Apparently remembering something, she clapped her hands together as if finally remembering what it was. Oh, you mean Big Brother Whiskers. At that moment, time seemed to stop for the two older shinobi in the room. Kushina was the first to break the silence and ask curiously, Mito? Do you happen to know who I am talking about? Mito nodded her head exaggeratedly in response. Of course, when mommy and daddy are not home, I go visit old man Tucci and big sis Ayame. I see him sometimes, but we never talked. Kushina nodded at her daughter's response, before the little redhead continued her tale. I like it when he's there. He always buys me ramen before he leaves. She exclaimed happily before adorning a slightly confused expression. But big sis Ayame always acts strange around him. Her face turns red a lot. She then drew closer to her mother, as if she was telling some sort of big secret. She whispered once her mother was in close proximity, I think big sis Ayame is allergic to Naruto, but doesn't want to tell him to make him feel bad. Kushina could only giggle at her daughter's silliness and innocence. Oh, how it was to be young and have your first crush. Little Mito, she's not allergic to him. It just means she likes him. Confused for only a moment, Mito seemed to understand after a moment of thinking. I agree. I like him too. At this, Minato felt like he would begin to cough out blood in response to such blasphemy. There is no way my little girl has her first crush already, it's too soon. I'm not ready to be a grandfather. Minato began to lose himself in his thoughts, seemingly forgetting that Mito still wasn't of marrying age. That's right, she must be thinking we're still talking about food. That has to be it. In order to relieve his worries, he glanced to Mito to see the look on her face, and almost immediately regretted it. A slightly red hue that was apparent to both Kushina and Minato appeared on the young Uzumaki's cheeks. She fidgeted slightly and seemed a tad bit flustered. It was the next words though that seemed to empty Minato of his soul. Plus, Mito seemed to stop for a moment before placing a hand to her heated cheeks. He looks kinda cool. She finished with a slight glimmer of admiration in her eyes, not realizing the damage she was doing to her father. Kushina openly and loudly laughed at this. It was loud enough that Minato was sure that his secretary in the floors below was able to hear her. With dull eyes, Minato was left with only one thing in mind. "I'm sorry Naruto, but I kind of hope you don't come back. I pray for your safety and continued separation from my daughter." Uzushigakure hidden chamber. There was a stern peace inside the recently unlocked chamber. It was an eerie calm that was enough to put anyone on edge. There was a light chill within the room as silence reigned in. At least, silence did reign the interior of the chamber. That is, until a figure with a familiar mop of red hair began to awaken from their temporary comatose state of slumber. A shiver ran through his body, feeling the cold chill of the room pass through his senses. It was a slow process, but he began to raise his body from the floor, leaning against the now open doors for support until he became more aware of his situation. "God, my aching, everything," he spoke to himself, feeling the repercussions from his most recent endeavor. He could feel pain within every cell of his body, but noted that it seemed quite subdued in comparison to what he had felt before. It was a while before he was able to form any sort of productive action. He was still against the door for a while, attempting to rush the healing of his body through distributing his chakra into his muscles, organs, and tenketsu points. It was a slow process, but he knew he would be incapacitated until he was able to take care of his body. What slowed the process even further was the fact that he lacked any nourishment for a few days now, and though he had trained to starve himself for extended periods of time, it was an unhealthy course of action and could negatively affect his growth. He was still extremely lacking in chakra as well due to most of it being drained, and he knew the recovery of it all would take some time. It was shocking to him considering how he had never felt so drained, due in part to his unique bloodline, but he supposed nothing was truly impossible in the world. His adventure through the tunnels and bout with a tortuous door seemed to only prove these thoughts. It was a very long while, perhaps half a day before he felt he was capable of moving without pain, so he decided to take a closer look in his surroundings. The chamber itself didn't seem too different from where he started, but the difference lied in what was in the room. As he had recalled before passing out, there was an ancient-looking pedestal before him with scrolls of differing colors that seemed to levitate from its position. He proceeded to approach the curious-looking items, grabbing them from their position and examined them more closely. To his left was a black scroll the same size and thickness of his forearm, and it seemed to have a blood seal array surrounding the white symbol of his clan that was also imprinted onto the scroll. Turning his head to the right, he saw a scroll similar in size but opposing in color. It was white along with a black imprint of the mysterious clan symbol he had seen before. Surrounding the symbol was a sealing array slightly more complex than the other. There were 2 rings of seals that seemed to surround the clan crest. His curiosity and excitement began to eat at him as he pondered the mystery of the scrolls, and before he decided to take any sort of action, he was interrupted by a harsh growl from his stomach. Naruto turned his curious gaze into a sharp, cold glare towards his stomach, seemingly because he felt betrayed by his natural bodily function. "You traitor," he thought to himself. As much as he wanted to take in his hard-earned prize, he was aware of his current situation. He was starving in an empty chamber with no exits in sight. If he did not escape soon, he would die here. He cursed the human body and their needs for survival before pondering his situation. If I want to live long enough to read what is inside the scrolls, I'm going to have to find a way out of here. But how? And before he could finish his thought, a sealing matrix appeared suddenly on the pedestal that previously hosted the 2 scrolls, before flashing a familiar blinding light. This happened for a moment before the room adopted its previous state of darkness and solitude. In a flash of light, Naruto found himself in the ruins of the library he had been inside of before his journey into the tunnels and chambers. The sun was high in the sky showing signs of falling, signifying more than half of the day was over. His face was currently blank as he was starting to question his sanity. I swear there is a conscience in that labyrinth. There are just way too many coincidences going on in there. He would have continued his analysis of the chamber if it weren't for a familiar sound of growling that came from his stomach. Focusing his eyes onto the 2 scrolls that were in his hands currently, he sighed in exasperation before tucking them away into a storage seal he had on his arm. Stretching his still sore muscles and bones, he began to move away from the ruins in an effort to fulfill his needs to survive. Alright, let's find some food before settling down and doing anything else. It was later in the day now and approaching the evening if the sun gaining an orange and purplish hue was any sort of evidence to go by. Naruto could be found seated around a small fire he started not long ago with several fish being cooked on sticks. There were not many resources to work with on a ruined island such as this, but if there was one good thing about being surrounded by a large body of water, it was the excess amount of fish. He had also found a source of fresh water on the island, which he supposed should have been obvious. There was no way there could have been an island full of people without some form of fresh water, and importing such a basic need seemed pretty stupid if he might say so himself. He was just finishing his 23rd serving of cooked fish before sitting down with a content look on his face. He was not sure how long he was incapacitated for, considering he had washed up onto the coastline of the village for a time and his most recent knockout from the door of hell. Judging by the amount he ate, he had assumed it might have been quite a while, days even. It was hard to tell the passing of time without any source for doing so other than the sun. He then proceeded to unseal one of the scrolls he had locked away, summoning the first one that had caught his attention. He held the black Uzumaki scroll in his hands before taking a long, deep breath. He couldn't deny that he was excited to see what was inside. It was something he had desired for a long time. He would be the first one ever since the time of his clan's destruction to perhaps even see the scroll, let alone read it or be aware of its existence. He bit into his thumb, forming a few drops of blood before he swiped it over his crest mark, and the scroll began to glow a low, dark light before disappearing all at once. He had to say, it was a bit anticlimactic. He assumed some legendary being would be released or some great weapon would form, but he supposed that was his rare childish side taking over. He peeled back the edge of the scroll, opening it a bit, and came upon a thought-provoking sentence that seemed to be the name of the scroll. He read aloud, "Scroll of Origin, Foundation of Yin." It was a curious title, but he did not seem to form any deeper thoughts before opening the scroll further to read whatever else was inside. He was sure he would come to understand it more if he read through the content first. He was unsurprised by the content, if not a little disappointed to say the least. For the first half of the scroll, it had various sealing designs and names and may or may not have heard of before. They started off from the simple storage and blood seals, to various styles of barriers and arts that each served a different and unique purpose. He did note that there were differences in design that actually heavily improved their effectiveness. The storage seal could store more and the blood seals would only release if it came directly from the person. This avoided robberies from people who managed to get a drop of their blood. It was amazing, but he almost wanted there to be something more fantastic, fantasy-like even. He supposed though this was the reality of the world though, that was, until he came upon a technique that seemed horrifyingly familiar as he read every word. Sensory void prison. A product of many years of study, research, and experimentation into the human anatomy has resulted in what many deem the most inhumane and disturbing of techniques. Naruto gulped audibly when he read the short description of the technique before continuing with the passage. A large canvas is required in order to draw the necessary characters and patterns for the seals, and mastery in micro-sealing is imperative. Naruto paused once more, pondering the term that had yet to come up before. Micro-sealing? I've never heard of such a thing. Was that what I couldn't see before when I was trying to study it? He pondered this for another moment, before deciding to continue his reading. When a subject enters the presence of the seal, immediate effect is taken place. As the name implies, the subject enters a state where he loses all of his senses, except the ability to think. This begins to torture the subject, slowly degrading their sanity. Past examples were known to perform incredibly demeaning, degrading, and harmful acts upon themselves, in an effort to regain feeling. All subjects died in the end, and were not blessed to even feel pain when they were released from their misery. Naruto could now be seen shivering at the thought. A technique such as this was diabolical, perhaps even evil, but he couldn't help this natural interest he had in its creation. A thought seemed to appear in his mind and he shockingly found that he didn't mind thinking this way. I want this, I want to learn it. The power of this technique was terrifying to say the least and could be used as a useful deterrent in some cases. He decided to continue reading the passage to the end for any more information he could use. This technique was developed for the sake of imprisoning the worst of criminals when death was determined as too light of a punishment. It also served as a tool of interrogation, breaking the mind of any subject who had entered. Naruto could understand its uses, but it was the next line that shocked him the most. This technique has yet to be completed. This technique was not complete? If his mind wasn't blown already from what he had read earlier, it had surely exploded now. He truly had this strong desire to make this technique his in every way, evolve it, and refine it to be used as the perfect weapon. Breaking himself out of his drunken stupor of excitement, and continued down the scroll. He gave a passing glance at the names of different techniques that were all powerful in their own right. The section soon changed from sealing techniques to different methods of sealing. It wasn't a large list, but he did recognize that micro-sealing had been mentioned. Essentially, it revolved around the principle of writing out a sealing array and compressing it onto a single line or character. It was an incredibly flexible and powerful art. He was certain that if Danzo had ever caught wind of such a method, the seals that existed on all tongues of the root members would certainly be more potent and serve their original design much more effectively. It was a scary thought, but as long as Naruto didn't spread the information himself, he was safe. There were also other methods that caught his eye, like three-dimensional sealing, or animate sealing, but he decided to give them a better read later on. Though it was a great feeling having learned that there were so many styles of sealing, as well as powerful techniques, he didn't think anything was so shocking that it deserved to be preserved so strongly, that was, until he came upon a final discovery. Near the end of the scroll, there was a passage that detailed his clan a bit more. It was the first mention of his clan throughout the entire scroll, so his attention was caught immediately. The content itself, though, brought a dumbfounded expression onto his face. The passage read, "To the successor of the scroll. The history of the Uzumaki dates back to a time that followed the sealing of the living deity and progenitor of chakra, Kagaya Ostetsuki. The Uzumaki clan are living descendants of her sons, Hamura and Hagoromo Otsutsuki, though because we were not more skilled in the more appealing arts like jutsu or genjutsu, we were kept in the shadows. For ages this continued while the sons of Hagoromo battled each other through conflicting opinions on peace. This stretched even beyond their time as the reincarnations of Indra and Asura continue this tradition, even possibly until your present time. For years our clan lived in the shadows until I came upon three great revelations that pushed our clan forward into heights that were capable of overthrowing even the prowess of the two reincarnates. A prowess and skill that was once able to seal even the primordial entity that was the ten-tailed beast. Our first revelation came in the form of Fuinjutsu, or better known as the sealing arts. We have long since studied this mysterious art and discovered that it was very flexible and versatile of what it could do. Things that were otherwise impossible with ninjutsu was given form through the sealing arts. Our clan, for an unknown reason at the time, was capable of deciphering the language and pattern of seals and their characters. This mystery became unknown to us until another discovery was made. It came in the form and technique we now claim as a bloodline limit, adamantine sealing chains. Unknown to the general populace, there was more to this technique than meets the eye. It was with this knowledge and further research that I came upon the second revelation, and it was one I kept a secret from my brethren even until my death. The Uzumaki did not specialize in the sealing arts. The moment Naruto read this, he froze. What did this mean? How could their clan not specialize in the art? It was a form they were known to use through the ages for combat, and was the reason why they had become feared. It was the reason they met an unfortunate fate that led to their total destruction. He was dying to know the answer, and the next words did not disappoint. We fooled ourselves into thinking we specialized in the art because we were capable of understanding it easier than others. I had always felt that this case was always lacking a reason, and once the development of the adamantine sealing chains came into existence, I knew I had found the answer. The Uzumaki had been gifted an unnaturally high affinity towards the yin release. I found that the theory behind this art was incredibly vast, infinite even. Yin release was a form that governed imagination. It is through yin release that form could be created from nothing. It was this that made us specialize in the sealing arts. Sealing itself was a medium used to create miracles with yin release, but really skilled Uzumaki were able to project these abilities without the use of seals. The adamantine sealing chains was the perfect example of this. Chakra was granted the form of chains with an ability to suppress opponents at the level of tailed beasts. Reading up to there, Naruto now understood what made his clan truly scary: potential. His clan was capable of so much more than just the sealing arts, but they were not aware of it. They most likely thought that sealing was their bloodline ability, and their ability to create chains from nothing was just a physical manifestation of it. So much potential was wasted because of a misunderstanding. It was obvious that the person who wrote the scroll did not speak of this to anyone, and it was for the right reasons. It was dangerous knowledge, one that was capable of turning the world against their clan out of fear. Not that it mattered much since whatever was left of his clan had scattered across the nations. If what this person said was true, the Uzumaki were capable of creating far more than just chains, and their limit only reached as far as their imagination and skill did, not considering the needed chakra usage, of course. To have the ability to give form to anything from nothing was a near godlike ability, but he knew he was nothing of the sort, at least, not yet anyway. This was the sort of strength he had been seeking, the strength he needed to fight back against all odds and protect himself and his future. With renewed vigor and continued to read in order to find out the last revelation. He had no doubt he was ready for an even bigger surprise. The discovery of yin release was a huge step in my development, and it was also what led me to discover the final revelation. It was a revelation that brought our own clan to greater heights and our efficiency in battle. The final revelation was the formation of the Kami clan. You are not yet ready to learn of the Kami clan, I'm afraid. Not yet, at least. Naruto couldn't help but release an expression of disappointment, before perking up at the following words. I can assure you though, that if you are able to unseal the other scroll, you will understand. The fact that you were able to unlock the door that kept the scrolls hidden away proves that you are destined to release it. However, you must first study the material of this scroll. You will need great knowledge in micro-sealing, as well as develop your abilities in yin release. I have not bothered with listing any yin release techniques since they are based on one's imagination. You will be given the methods to bring about such a miracle, but you will ultimately be the one to create your own techniques. These things are challenging and will take time. I suggest you seclude yourself for a period of time for training, as I have done. It took me 10 years to master the techniques in the scroll, something I'm sure you will be capable of doing, if not surpassing me. You would be the first to have read these scrolls, and I pray the knowledge will be able to assist you further along into the future. Please bring our clan into a brighter future of success and security. The founder and first clan head of the Uzumaki clan, Ozai Uzumaki. Naruto could feel his heart pulsing, wanting to burst out, but incapable of doing so. There was just too much information at once, he didn't know how to take it. He finally learned what his people were truly capable of, and he was probably the only one who was aware of this. His body shook in excitement and anticipation, and he was extremely eager to learn the materials of this scroll. He then turned his attention to the white scroll with the symbol he now knew represented the Kami clan. Training in seclusion, huh? He thought to himself. If he ever wanted to know what was inside that scroll, he knew it would take quite a bit of time. He was well aware of his current position within Konoha. If he returned, all that would await him was further suffering and more watchful eyes, something he couldn't afford to have. His affinity for yin release and knowledge of powerful sealing techniques and methods is a secret he must keep at all cost from Konoha, especially from Danzo. It was obvious the knowledge would be used selfishly or to put others in danger. He would then become a breeding horse for the village, forsaking the future of any children he created. It was a life he would not deign to do, especially against children of his own. He knew his friends in Konoha may miss him, but Naruto also knew he didn't belong there. He had a feeling in his gut he was never a native to Konoha. He may stop by in secret or develop a spy network there in the future, but he refused to live there. A home was a place you felt safe and loved, and he could not call a place that tortured him out of false spite a home. He closed his eyes and inhaling a deep gust of chilling air. It was dark now, and the cool breeze could be felt and only the crackling sound of a dying fire could be heard before him. He had just made possibly the easiest decision he ever had in his entire life. Opening his eyes, he whispered to no one in particular with a calm, peaceful expression adorning his face and smiled. Sorry guys, but I've always wanted to be free from that place, and now I have that chance. He stopped speaking before he turned his gaze to the stars in the night sky. I'm afraid Konoha is no longer my home, if it ever was in the first place. I'll be sure to visit in the future, but for now, this is goodbye. A mega-cure tower. The village hidden in the rain was rightfully named so, like all of the other hidden villages. It was an endless downpour of water that only broke this cycle on Sunday. This was a tribute done by a figure that could be seen seated on the tallest tower of the village, a place where Hanzo the salamander had once resided. The face of the tower was disturbing in appearance, literally forming a face on one side with a tongue protruding from its mouth. The eyes this face bore were purple with black-lined ripples within, very much similar to the eyes of the orange-haired figure that sat on the edge of the tongue. His face was littered with a rod-like piercing through his nose, and several studded ones with a long bar going through his ear. He had a fang-like piercing below his lip, and a gaze that seemed to express no emotions whatsoever. Pain. The man, now named Pain, turned his attention to the voice of a woman he had grown to be very familiar with through the years. There, he saw a beautiful woman with a large paper flower holding her blue hair in a bun to the side. Her piercing amber eyes looked upon Pain, waiting to be recognized. "Have you found anything, Conan?" The now named Conan merely shook her head in response. Seemingly no longer interested, he turned his attention away from her back to the horizon of his village. "I see." Conan's expression had faltered slightly into one of sadness before correcting back into her neutral expression. It was saddening to see what had become of Nagato, though she could understand. She felt the same amount of pain he had, if not more. They had lost too much, and they felt happiness was nothing but a dream for them now. "I see you two are now together. Might I ask what it was you were searching for, Pain, Conan?" Pain now changed his focus upon the new entry. It was a man with a tuft of black hair, garbed in a similar cloak of black and red clouds. His face covered by a spiraling orange mask, with an opening to the right that revealed a dojutsu well known by all, the Sharingan. Pain was quiet for a moment before he decided to answer back. "We were searching for potential members to join our cause, Madara." This figure was none other than Madara Uchiha, at least, that was what he wanted people to believe. Not caring too much about the subject, Madara responded in kind. "Please, refer to me as Toby from now on. My identity is not something to be revealed quite yet, and to solve your little problem, I have a few prospects that may be worth looking into." That seemed to catch Pain's attention as he now locked eyes with the masked figure. Toby continued, "You will hunt down a man by the name of Kakuzu. He is said to be an immortal that had even fought the first Hokage in the past. He has experience beyond his time, and is good at collecting money from high bounties. Funds will be needed for any sort of progress." He then turned his eyes to Conan. "You will focus on Sasori of the Red Sand. He is a master puppeteer that has even turned the late third case cage into his puppet. He has a well-established spy network and his resources could be used well." At this knowledge, both figures nodded in response before Pain questioned him. "And what of you?" Toby released a short, low chuckle before answering. "I have two prospects in mind, but they are both quite young for now, both originating from the Hidden Leaf Village." At those words, Pain and Conan seemed to tense their bodies, before quickly returning to a neutral stance. Noticing the slight tensing of their muscles but choosing to ignore it, and spoke on. "In fact, I have already led one of my prospects away from their village. He was in need of training materials, and where he went, not even I am capable of reaching." That seemed to stop their thoughts for a moment. A place not even Madara was capable of reaching? They could only imagine what that place must be like. "There is no telling what kind of resources he may be able to provide for us, and that is a gamble I am willing to risk. From his background though, I am certain he will become an asset like no other, and I'm positive he will not be returning to his village, I made sure of it." At that moment, his Sharingan seemed to spin very ominously, as if to say he was in control. It was something that seemed to bother Pain. Pain would become the god of the world, if only to grant it an everlasting peace. Madara, in his eyes, was only a tool for his goals. From Toba's eye, space began to distort, engulfing his entire body. They both still have a long ways to go, but I am positive that they will both join the Akatsuki in due time. I have things to check, so I will be leaving first." With those final words, Toby left in a twist of space, leaving nothing but the air and rain in his wake. To him, they were all pawns, puppets to be used for the grand scheme of his plan. He was setting events in place and controlling them by the wire, and the show has only just begun. Kusagakure Forest. "Mom, why?" Muffled cries and sobs could be heard in the forests of Kusagakure. Sitting against a large tree lays the young culprit, holding onto her knees in an act of loneliness and self-preservation. It was a natural instinct for her, as she continued to delve deeper into depression with her only source of comfort gone from her life. She was a young girl of only 8 years, and had an appearance that many would find rare in this time. She bore crimson eyes and fair skin, with wild red locks of hair that was styled unusually to one side, while the other appeared well kept and straight that hung down to her chin. She wore dark brown glasses, though that did nothing to hide the effect of the captivating red pools that were her eyes. She was clothed in a short-sleeved shirt that was a dark shade of purple with a dark brown collar, and pants and sandals that were a light shade of tan. The way the sunset created a beautiful fusion of purple and orange cast off an air of melancholy and wonder. The way the light of the setting evening shone itself onto her sorrowful figure was almost picturesque. "Why'd I, Sniff, have to be alone, Mom?" The young girl continued wallowing in her despair despite the pleasant evening and quiet environment. What was unsettling about her figure though, was perhaps how there were a few bite marks on her upper arm. This scene continued for a moment until it was broken by the landing of several figures. They were all plain in appearance with either black or brown hair, with the most unique one being the man in the middle with a mask that hid his nose and mouth. If the young girl noticed their presence, she did nothing to acknowledge them. "Karen Uzumaki, you are asked to return. You are required to carry out the responsibilities your mother left behind. That was the agreement for you to stay here." Being reminded her mother's recent passing made the young redhead's body shiver. She turned her downcast gaze to the figure in front of her, and replaced her look of sadness with anger. "No, you guys let my mother die. And for what? A quick fix?" She spoke with unhidden rage. She truly cared nothing for her village or the people within. The only reason she stayed was for her mother, and they were the ones to let her die. "I'm afraid your refusal isn't an option." The masked man spoke without care in his voice. He was a trained shinobi, so he had no reason to be afraid of a young and untrained girl. "You can return willingly, or through force. These are your only options. You will also begin training as a shinobi of our village. We believe this to be a fair trade-off for your services." He spoke once again without emotion. At his words, Karen's body tensed and her face contorted to an extreme amount of hate. Even if she were young, she understood what she was. A tool to be used as a sacrifice for the village shinobi, and having her become one would only increase how fast she could respond to their summons. It was sick, and she was well aware of it. But before she could continue to voice her displeasure, she sensed a powerful presence in the area. It was a strange type of chakra, where opposite energies seemed to coalesce in perfect synergy. It was the mix of a bright and comforting sun with the luminescent and cooling moon. When she felt out for it more, she found herself in a state of euphoria. Before she could continue her thoughts, she felt the source of such a wonderful chakra begin to speak. "You fellows are Kusa shinobi? I didn't take your people to be pedophiles. You guys must be fans of Icha Icha, Loli Land." The figure spoke from the shadows of the trees before revealing himself to the group. The said shinobi were greatly annoyed at the comment from this individual, something that didn't go unnoticed, so the figure continued with a hint of amusement in his voice. "Geez, you guys need to know that you can't mix fantasy with reality, and even in the book they were technically legal. What you're doing here is straight up child assault." From the voice, the mysterious figure could be assumed to be a young male. His face was currently being hidden by an Anbu porcelain mask with a blue swirl stretched across, one that Karen found to be familiar. Matching the symbol in color, the figure's hair was also blue and wild in appearance. He also wore a familiar set of Anbu clothing, with black pants and metal forearm protectors. For a top, he had a sleeveless, high-collared gray vest with his arms bandages up to his elbows. It was a bit surprising how little protection he was wearing, but the Kusa shinobi chalked it up to him being overconfident. The figure smirked inwardly at how the said shinobi began to tense and take a combat-ready stance. "Who are you? And what is your reason for being in the village?" The masked shinobi spoke with stern authority that seemed to do nothing to affect the new arrival. Chuckling slightly, the blue-haired figure responded, "Well, I guess you can call me a bounty hunter of sorts. You can call me NaruKami for now. As for why I'm here, I was just traveling when I spotted an adorable sad girl." Said girl blushed slightly at his words, but she quickly reined in the heat that appeared on her cheeks, knowing this wasn't exactly a situation to be too relaxed in. Becoming tired of the pointless banter, the Kusa shinobi began drawing their kunai and shuriken, preparing for any sort of confrontation. "I'm afraid you do not have permission to enter our village, so you will need to present yourself to the council and face judgment." NaruKami, still amused, replied playfully, "Oh? I think I should be the one reporting you guys for attempted child molestation." Tick marks made their appearance onto the foreheads of said shinobi, and their frustration showed when they threw their weapons at him. When all of their weapons embedded themselves onto the blue-haired shinobi, Karen could only gasp in shock and fear. She knew of death, but has yet to see someone being killed, so her emotions were understandable. The masked man smirked, thinking he succeeded, until he saw the recently skewered figure burst into smoke, revealing only to be a log. He then felt a palm strike land onto his stomach and sent him flying into the trees. The other two were shocked for a moment but were quick to recover by rushing towards the offending shinobi. However, they did not make it far before they were promptly frozen in place. They were confused for a moment before they heard the enemy in front of them answer the questions they seemed to have formed, in a tone that continued to show hid amusement. "Did you guys think you were the first to arrive here? I already placed the area you're standing in under a paralysis seal. You have nowhere to run and nowhere to hide." At this moment, the atmosphere seemed to freeze and all sense of humor was gone from the figure's voice. It brought a feeling of dread to the frozen shinobi as they watched a yellowish-gray glowing katana materialized from nowhere into the aqua head's hands. "Adamantine sealing sword," he called out in his head as it began to finalize in shape and sharpness. He walked past the two Kusa shinobi, flashing a cut of his blade that would put trained samurai to shame towards the necks of the paralyzed ninjas. "And all that is left for you." As he spoke, the sword dissipated into the air and the heads of the trapped shinobi fell to the ground. He turned to glance at his victims and finished in a cold tone, "With the authority of a god, is death." Karen, who had been watching this altercation for the past several seconds, was still in shock. "He's fast," she thought to herself. Though she did feel a little sick at his display of strength and beheading of the shinobi, she still couldn't help but feel some admiration for the young man before her. As cold as he seemed just now, his chakra didn't lie to her. She was a gifted sensor, and was able to pick up the unique form of people's chakra to the extent that she could even see someone's character through their chakra. She knew he was a good person at heart, and that only made her feel safe. "My hero," she thought to herself once more with adoration in her eyes and flushed cheeks. The man before her truly seemed like a knight protecting their princess, just like the stories her mother used to tell her. Her inner musings were broken when she picked up dark intentions through the chakra of the last remaining Kusa shinobi. She watched in horror as a large Fuma shuriken began to close in on her hero, without him seeming to notice. "Watch out," she called out, but the figure never moved from his spot. She watched as her savior dropped dead to the ground, with his heart pierced by the flying weapon. "This was more trouble than anticipated, but you underestimated me, thinking a simple palm strike was capable of killing me. You are naive," spoke the voice of the masked man as he walked towards the corpse. Strangely enough, Karen didn't seem sad, only confused. The chakra of the corpse seemed to be pulsing constantly, and distorting slightly, almost as if. Her eyes then widened when she heard a voice from beside her say, as if it were a genjutsu, "Right, Chibi?" She turned her attention to the side and saw a familiar mess of blue hair, and she wasn't the only one to notice his presence. "An illusion? Since when?" the masked figure questioned, slightly intimidated by the prowess of the shinobi before him so far. He moved too quickly for his eyes to keep up. He could form weapons from nothing, and was capable of genjutsu he couldn't even notice? He was stacking up to be a top player, and he wasn't sure if he could keep up with this mysterious shinobi. NaruKami looked at him as if the man before him was stupid. Why would a shinobi tell you his secrets? Especially when it is an enemy he is still fighting. Tired of being insulted, the Kusa shinobi charged forward towards NaruKami, hoping to combat him in taijutsu, and was not disappointed. Dodging a wild punch from the masked man, NaruKami fired a kick into his side, expecting him to be sent flying once more. He was surprised to see that the man had not only stood in his place, but his skin seemed to darken. Noticing NaruKami's slight surprise, he laughed out loud before retaliated with a kick of his own, only for it to be dodged as well. "Haha, you probably think you're something special? Well, I possess a Kekkei Genkei that makes anything physical useless. Steel release. Iron hide. He finished loudly, before all of his skin darkened and he continued his charge. NaruKami continued to dodge gracefully even when weapons, kicks and punches were thrown at him. This only seemed to boost the masked ninja's ego, thinking he had him on the ropes. Ha ha ha, can't you do anything but run away, boy? He continued to egg him on despite the fact he had been missing the whole time. Karen watched on with a nervous sweat, praying that the masked man wasn't too much for the blue-haired shinobi. After NaruKami dodged another wild punch that shattered the ground where he once stood, he moved away a great distance. The Kusa ninja was increasingly growing irritated, wanting to end this man's life sooner rather than later. His chakra was beginning to run low at a pace faster than usual, which he found strange, but nothing too terrible. Before he could continue his barrage of strikes, he heard a cold voice ring out from the man before him that froze him in his tracks. "That's it? You are a Junin, aren't you?" He could only sigh in disappointment as he shook his head. "I swear, if I want a challenge, I'm going to have to start attacking S ranks or something. Guys like you are nothing but trash that relies on one ability for everything." He continued, before he sent a harsh glare to the Kusa nin that he could feel even through NaruKami's mask. It sent shivers down his spine, but he quickly corrected himself to shake it off. "Your uncanny ability to underestimate your opponents is astounding. I will make sure you regret it," he responded with clear disdain dripping from his voice. NaruKami still only continued to shake his head in disappointment, and slowly rose one hand into a hand seal. "I don't think I am the one underestimating his opponent, release," he said before chanting out a single word. Upon hearing this, the masked Kusa nin felt his body freeze again and immediately his chakra was drained. Once this happened, a small set of sealing characters appeared onto his chest and began to glow. From the seal, tendrils of chakra appeared and wrapped itself around his body, with his steel release immediately dissipating. He felt ragged, as if he performed a marathon for 3 days straight without rest. He felt his chakra was completely gone and his body was becoming strained in pain as the tendrils began to tighten around him. With a tired voice, he asked, "What have you done?" Dropping his hand to a resting position, he decided to humor the man. "Parasitic chakra seal," he said nonchalantly. "I planted it onto your body from the first palm strike. I was looking to experiment with it on somebody, and you just so happened to be my subject." He spoke with exaggerated excitement, though you could see he was happy with the results of his work. Fury and exhaustion was all that could be seen in the Kusa nin's eyes as he glared hatefully at the man before him. Karen was shocked at the chakra she was sensing, and was curious at what was happening exactly. Sensing the redhead's curiosity, NaruKami turned to her and spoke loud enough for her to hear. "I'm sure you can sense it, but I essentially implanted a parasite seal on his body. It takes time, but it begins to adapt to the person's chakra nature, assimilating with it." NaruKami then turned his attention back to the Kusa nin before continuing. "I was making you use more chakra and strength so the seal could fuse faster to your chakra network. And once that is done," he then snapped his fingers. In response, a tendril reached for Ninja's neck and began to choke very tightly, but not enough to snap his neck. "Your own chakra becomes your worst enemy," he said with a mischievous smirk, unseen to both Karen and the subject to his experiment. NaruKami shrugged his shoulders and stated, "Even if it is slow acting, I thought it would be fun to see someone fight against their own chakra. And it certainly didn't disappoint." You, The Kusa nin tried to speak, but found that he was incapable due to lack of oxygen. And once more, the Aqua Head's cold voice appeared. "Now that I see that it is a success, you no longer serve a purpose. So please," he paused to raise an open hand, before clenching it into a tight fist. "Die." And once he finished, the tendrils shattered all of the victim's bones and neck, before dissipating along with the man's life. NaruKami let out a short, but audible sigh. He truly was disappointed. He had plenty of other things he wanted to experiment with and try out, but the ninja he's encountered so far just were not up to his standards. He may just have to actively seek out S-rank shinobi, but they were all skilled in staying hidden. Turning his attention back to the girl, he was only hoping that she wasn't too traumatized by his cruelty. He became surprised when he came closer to the girl and saw that in her eyes wasn't fear, but worship? Said girl just looked at the man before her and shouted loudly, "Thank you." And faster than he could react, she embraced him in a hug. He was about to pry her off before he felt her sob a little into his torso. "Thank you, hic, thank you, sniff." NaruKami could only wrap his arms around the girl in an effort to comfort her. He couldn't help that he was a sucker for a girl in tears. I doubt there is a man with a heart that would turn away a girl in tears. He thought to himself as he helplessly continued to calm the girl down with small ministrations to her back. It was about 10 minutes before she pulled away from him and wiped away her tears. "Thank you, you were really amazing," she said in unhidden excitement, before her face contorted into one of confusion. "But why did you help me? We've never met before, and now you might be hunted down by Kusagakure shinobi," she said with slight worry in her tone. NaruKami then adopted a relaxed stance before ruffling the girl's hair. "Well, I have a few reasons. 1. I really did just happen to be around the area before I spotted you. And 2. He then brought his hand to his mask, before pulling it off slowly. Karen then watched as his mask came off. His hair transformed from the dark shade of blue it was before, to a vibrant red. She blushed slightly when she saw the handsome face of the man before her. He appeared 13 in age, and his skin was flawless other than what seemed to be whiskers adorned on his cheeks. She thought it was rather cute on him, and was tempted to pet them. He was above average in height, somewhere close to 5 feet 4 inches. A closer inspection of his figure showed how fit his body truly was. She was broken from her musings when he continued to speak. He smirked, noticing he now had her full attention, and proceeded to shock her with his next words. "Besides, we are from the same clan." Karen did the only thing she could do from such a revelation, she fainted. Our now revealed Naruto Uzumaki could only scratch his helplessly before whispering to himself, "Was that too much?" -3 weeks later, Konohagakure Gates. Heading towards the gates of Konoha, 2 figures could be seen. One was a red-haired girl currently being carried on the back of the other blue-haired figure. She could be seen with her arms wrapped around his neck, questioning him about their current destination. "Didn't you say you didn't like this place, Naru?" the young Karen asked innocently. Her only response was a nod of his head. "Then why are we here?" she continued to question. Naruto could only sigh inwardly. This little girl has been attached to him since he saved her from the Kusa shinobi. When she awoke from her small nap, courtesy of fainting, her natural inquisitive nature of a child kept pressing him for answers. True to her clan name, she was immensely stubborn on finding out more about her clan and Naruto himself. It was cute, for the first 5 hours. Then it became downright exhausting, and he couldn't afford to stay there too long before more shinobi showed up. Before he could leave though, she practically begged to go with him. He was reluctant about caring for a child at first, until she unleashed something he had yet to experience before then. Those eyes, they were truly weapons every man should fear. Naruto thought in slight terror and tremble in his step. He had never experienced such a look before, and almost instinctually dubbed them, the eyes. I doubt anyone with a heart could resist those things. Naruto was then broken from his thoughts when he felt a pinch on his cheek that came from a small hand slipping under his mask. He turned his attention back to the young redhead and noticed she had a slight pout on her face. "Stop ignoring me, Naru," she exclaimed to him, more for attention than an actual answer to her question. Naruto supposed that should be a given for someone her age. He was well aware of what happened to her mother through their journey together, and now that she had no one, he thought that she had a stronger desire to have someone with her. He then decided to be the acting big brother until she was able to find people precious to her. Unknown to him though, Karen didn't truly desire a familial relationship with him. She could only see him as her prince who rescued her. In her mind, her stake had already been claimed the moment she saw him. Naruto and his beautiful chakra was hers now, and she would make sure that was clear to others. She had yet to understand what love was, but desire was something very basic to every child. And she knew what she wanted. Back to the topic at hand, Naruto sighed before responding back. "Well, I had to turn in that bounty we got last week, and there is something I have been meaning to look for here that I won't be able to find easily anywhere else." Karen only nodded her head in response. She didn't know the details, but it was clear through the fluctuations in his chakra that he was perturbed about going back to Konoha for any reason. She didn't think it was her place to ask him about it yet, and just took to being by his side. As they approached the gates, two guards could be seen. One appeared to have long, spiky black hair with a bandage across his face. The other had brown hair and dark eyes, and had his hair combed over his right eye. The two noticed the approaching figures, and seemed to tense a bit at the suspicious mask of Naruto. This was relieved slightly when they noticed he was carrying a young girl on his back who didn't seem to be afraid or worried. To them, this may allude to the idea that he may not be as bad as one might assume from his hidden identity. In a typical fashion, the brown-haired Izumo shouted, "Halt! Sat your business in Konoha." Naruto, hearing the man, reached for a scroll in his pocket, as well as his certification as a bounty hunter, and turned it over to the two men. "I'm here to turn in a bounty and hoping to receive some identification papers for little Karen here," he stated while pointed to the red head on his back. She pouted at being called little, but didn't say anything in response. She just turned her head away, ignoring the snickering of the two men before her. "Hee, it seems she isn't too fond about being called out on her height, much like another redhead we have in our village." Kotetsu spoke with a shiver down his spine. He remembered when he called Mito a shorty one time, and lived to regret it the next morning when he felt itching powder on his crotch. This wouldn't have been too bad if his hands weren't dipped in a chemical solution that made his genitalia burn every time he scratched it, and this happened for 3 days straight. Naruto was confused by the slight shiver of the man, but ignored it. When he received the papers, Kotetsu and Izumo then directed him to the Hokage's quarters to receive the bounty and register Karen for her papers. He briskly walked by them, and continued towards the tower, not exactly happy about returning to this village. "Sigh, this is gonna be a long day," he thought to himself before flashing away in a shuncheon of leaves. Hokage's tower. Naruto could now be seen standing before a desk that seated, arguably, one of the strongest shinobi within the village. Karen was holding Naruto's hand, and sent a glance of worry towards him. She felt him tense and his chakra fluctuate slightly upon seeing the blonde Hokage, so she figured that whatever happened in this village may have involved him. The said blonde shinobi was currently overlooking the scroll that held the head of an A-rank bounty they had placed long ago and nodded his head. "Thank you for your services and we will gladly repay you. Unfortunately, I must ask that you stay in the village for a bit." Naruto raised a hidden eyebrow towards the Hokage, but otherwise stayed silent so Minato could finish explaining his reasons. Taking his silence for further inquiry, Minato proceeded. While he wasn't a huge threat, he did have a sizable bounty. It will take some time to fully verify his identity and prepare the amount. I hope you can stay for a few days while we go through this process. We will fully compensate you for your stay here and prepare proper lodgings for you and the young girl." He then cast a curious glance to Karen. "So she is an Uzumaki. Kushina will probably be happy to hear there are more of her clan still living." Sensing his curious gaze, Karen moved behind Naruto away from Minato's view. Realizing he was causing her discomfort, he turned his attention back to Naruto, awaiting his response. Naruto could only nod his head. He planned to stay here regardless since he had another reason for being here, and it was sure to require longer than a day to achieve. "That is fine with me, Lord Hokage. I had already planned to stay here for a period of time to purchase more clothing for Karen as well as more traveling supplies. I already have my lodgings planned, but I appreciate the gesture." He then bowed his head slightly in respect, though Karen was able to feel his muscles tense once again and his chakra fluctuate even more than before, as if it were revealing his frustration. The Hokage nodded his head at his acceptance and then handed over a set of papers. "Here is the identification papers for young Karen, and it should be processed by tomorrow. Please enjoy your stay in Konoha." Naruto didn't bother to respond before grabbing Karen's hand and making his way out the door. "Enjoy my stay? Here?" Naruto ridiculed inwardly. "This place is the bane of my existence. I'll show you exactly how I enjoy my stay here." With those dark thoughts left behind, Naruto left the door and decided to make his way to the hotel he had booked. Streets of Konoha. "Naru, I don't like all the staring. Can we move faster?" Karen and Naruto were walking down the streets of Konoha, bypassing a lot of people and shops. It wasn't hard for them to garner attention considering their appearances. Karen herself was very adorable in appearance with vibrant red hair, and Naruto was very mysterious with his mask and uncommon blue hair. Their looks alone would gain interest, but together they made a very unique pairing. Karen was feeling a bit uncomfortable due to the natural heightened ability of awareness she has as a sensor. She also felt that they were followed by a couple of shinobi hidden in the shadows. She tugged on his sleeve, hoping to get her message across, and received a nod in reply. "We're unknowns here, Karen. It's natural we would be watched during our stay. The civilians are naturally curious and skeptical as well," he said, only barely hiding his dislike for the civilian populace. Noticing his constant shifts in demeanor since their arrival in the village, Karen decided to voice her concerns. "Naru, are you okay?" Hearing her words, Naruto turned his attention to her and sighed before ruffling her hair. "I'm fine, Karen. I just don't have a great history with Konoha. I'm still trying to work out some things with this place, but I'll be fine, okay?" Karen could sense the slightly sad tone in his voice, and decided to not question further. She only nodded her head in response. She also decided to take advantage of his ministrations with her hair by pushing her head into the palm of his hands. Naruto laughed a little, finding her obsession with his head rubbing cute and a little funny. She would act like a cat seeking attention at times, and could be bratty during others. Seriously, she has to be part cat, he thought. He turned his attention briefly to the anbu that were hidden. He noticed one had a cat mask that was commonly passed down, but he also saw another mask that he had yet to see from his time here. A weasel? I didn't even know they had a mask like that. He mused to himself, deep in thought about who it could be. He felt a strange familiarity with that figure, so it did linger his mind for a bit. The quiet moment of he had with Karen was broken when a yell was heard from a familiar-looking ramen shop. "Old man Tucci, I'd like 12 bowls of ramen please," shouted a young feminine voice. Recognizing the voice, Naruto smiled slightly beneath his mask, recognizing who the source was. Karen seemed to notice how Naruto became happier when he heard the girl's voice, making her voice frown slightly. She would admit to being a bit possessive of Naruto, but she figured it was only natural considering her circumstances. She noticed Naruto grab her hand and started to pull her along to the source of the yell. "Come on, Karen, I'll take you to one of the few places I like in Konoha." She only nodded her head before she found herself seated at a ramen stand with her guardian. They sat at the far right, waiting for their order to be taken. And as if on cue, a young brown-haired waitress came up to the two and proceeded to ask them what they would have. Karen wasn't sure what exactly to get, but Naruto seemed to place an order for anyways. "I'll have 12 bowls of miso ramen, and she will have the same." The young waitress appeared shocked for a moment before nodding her head slowly. She hadn't known anyone to eat that much unless they were an Uzumaki. Her thoughts briefly went to a male Uzumaki she had met when she was younger, before shaking her head. It was a sad time for her, hearing one of their best customers and crush go missing, but she managed to stave her sadness through work and time. Though she still felt pain now and then. She flashed a bright smile after her brief lapse in history to her customers before nodding her head. "We'll be right with you in a second." With that said, she turned away and continued to work on the preparations with her father. From the corner of her eye, Karen noticed another redhead seated at the opposite end of the stand who seemed just as surprised as Ayame had been. That lasted only for a moment before said redhead moved closer to them and began to converse. "Wow, I didn't know there was someone else in the village who could eat as much ramen as me or my mom." The little girl flashed a bright smile towards the two, showing how energetic and happy she really was. "My name is Mito Uzumaki Namikaze. But you can just call me Mito." Naruto nodded his head in response, smiling underneath his mask. "Nice to meet you, Mito. I'm NaruKami, and my little companion is Karen Uzumaki." Karen's only response was to send a stiff smile and bowed her head slightly in a greeting. "It's a pleasure." She was still a bit annoyed that Naruto seemed to be happier meeting the younger girl, but there was another reason she was stiff. When she searched out her chakra, she felt two completely opposing natures. One was bright like the sun, which could be seen in the girl's personality. However, she was also able to sense a malevolent and dark chakra around her stomach. It was huge in size and chaotic in nature. It made Karen reel back a bit and seek comfort from Naruto by grasping his arm. Naruto noticed this action, and knew exactly why she was acting this way, but remained silent for the time being. This all happened without Mito's notice, since she was more shocked knowing that there was another Uzumaki in the village. "Awesome, that means that we're kind of like cousins," she exclaimed excitedly. Karen's eyes seemed to widen a bit at the revelation, knowing she had more family within the village. Before the conversation could continue further, an old man in the back of the stand appeared with a large quantity of bowls prepared for their meal. Before Mito could dig into her food, she was suddenly poked in the side of her head by the blue-haired shinobi. It annoyed her a bit, and as she was about to voice it loudly, she saw him lift up the offending finger in front of her. "How about we make this a contest? Whoever eats their ramen the fastest wins. If I win, you pay for my meal. If you win, then I will pay for your meal and more." Sound good? Without hesitation, she responded, "All right. But don't come crying to me when your wallet is empty, Tsubasa." Naruto could only chuckle at her verbal tick. It was cute for someone her age. With Tucci serving as the judge, he nodded his head and said, "Ready? Set? Ramen." Mito proceeded to practically inhale her first bowl. It only took 10 seconds her to finish all of its contents. She smirked, knowing she would be victorious. She hasn't even lost to that pudgy kid Choji in a ramen eating contest. As she was about to start her second bowl, she heard 4 words that shocked her into place. "Thanks for the food." It was done in a calm tone, but Mito could hear the slight teasing and superiority in his voice. Watching this all go down, Karen was more shocked at how he was able to eat the ramen with his mask on. She would have to ask him how he was able to do that later. Mito was stunned to the point she couldn't form coherent words. "But, ramen, you're fast. That's not fair." Her shock was quickly replaced with comic outrage as she stood from her spot and pointed her finger in his direction. Naruto just stood and chuckled at her response. Ruffling her hair, he said, "What's the matter, little pepper? I won fair and square." Mito's displeasure was shown on her face almost immediately. It was a known fact that her mother was the red hot-blooded habanero of the leaf, so she felt his nickname was a play on her mother's nickname. The fact that she was called little only served to irk her more. "Hey, I'm not that little, and don't call me a pepper," she exclaimed in an over-exaggerated fashion by waving her arms around. She still did nothing to remove his hand from her head because it felt strangely warm. For once, Naruto laughed out loud, which caught even Karen by surprise. She had heard him chuckle every once in a while, but she had yet to hear him truly laugh like he just did. Because of this, she turned a glare to Mito and began to reflect on any information she had gathered from this meeting. Naru knows this girl and seems to have a soft spot for her. I'll need to keep an eye on her in the future. Naru is my Naru, she thought childishly to herself. She was still peeved Mito's hair was being ruffled, but did nothing to voice her displeasure. It was rare to see Naruto as happy as he is, and she didn't want to spoil it. When Naruto removed his hand from her head, he reached into his pocket to pull out a large sum of cash before placing it onto the table. Tucci and Ayame went wide-eyed when they saw this action, but remained silent. "Relax, little pepper, like I would make a chibi pay for my food," he managed to voice out in between chuckles. "To make up for it, I'll pay for your food and more. How does that sound?" At that, Mito instantly grew a smile onto her face before pulling Naruto into an abrupt hug, catching both him and Karen off guard, with the latter fuming a bit at the action. "Thank you, Naru," she yelled once more, before excitedly turning to Tucci. "You heard him, old man. I want 12 more bowls, Tsubasa." Tucci could only chuckle before returning back to his preparations, thanking the blue-haired young man for the good business. Naruto then pried Mito off of him, before voicing his leave. "Well, I and Karen should get going now, little pepper. We'll be here for a bit, so we'll probably see each other around at some point." Mito acknowledged them leaving with a smile and wave. "Okay, I will definitely beat you next time though, you better believe it, Tsubasa." At those last few words, Naruto shivered for a bit. Strange, that almost felt like something I should say? He then took Karen by her hand before leaving the stand and heading back to the hotel. Before he left the shop, he managed to catch sight of a familiar old man, one who used to be a shinobi. His figure seemed to freeze him for a moment, and drew another look of concern from Karen. It was someone who had offended him plenty of times in the past, someone who had tried to rape him on multiple occasions and burrowed kunai into his leg. He was perhaps the most disgusting of people he had encountered during his stay in Konoha, not counting Orochimaru. A cold light flashed in his eyes that made even Karen put a little distance between her and Naruto. "So you're still around, old trash?" he thought darkly. "Perhaps I should relieve a little stress tonight." With that, he and Karen returned back to their inn. One would be resting for the night, while the other would be having their own adventure. Streets of Konoha, evening. An old drunk man could be seen wandering the streets at night. It was darker out than usual with the clouds covering the moon slightly, so he found himself stumbling over several trash cans and bumping into buildings. As he moved through the streets, he felt himself suddenly pulled into an alley and thrown against the wall. If he were not an ex-trained shinobi, he felt as if his spine would have shattered on impact. Gah! He spat out excess saliva and the remains of whatever alcohol he held upon receiving the impact. He continued to writhe on the ground in pain, while a dark figure stood above him. It took him a moment to notice, but when he did, he became frightened and crawled himself to a wall. He was panting raggedly, trying to bear the pain and voicing out his grievances. Who are you? And what the hell are ya thinking? Still not fully aware of his circumstances, he yelled out as if he were the one in power and not groveling on the ground. He heard the figure chuckle softly before they decided to speak. What's wrong, geezer? Don't recognize me? I thought you said you were going to show me a good time. Was I right about you not being able to get it up? The ex-shinobi felt himself begin to boil in rage, but also thoroughly confused. Whoever this person was, he held some sort of enmity with him, and it was definitely a deep one. He was confused because he couldn't recall offending anyone. Deciding to not take his chances, he began to speak in a more respectful tone. Sir, I'm sure whatever enmity you have against me is misplaced. I don't ever recall someone with blue hair such as yours, so I'm positive you have the wrong person. Naruto just chuckled once more before placing his hand on his mask. Oh, I can assure you I'm not mistaken. So tell me. As he spoke, he slowly removed his mask, transforming his hair from blue to red, revealing a familiar set of whisker marks the man had long since thought disappeared from the village. He was stunned into silence when he recognized the boy before him. It can't be. Naruto produced a playful smirk on his face, amused by the old man's reaction before continuing. Do I still look feminine to you? The old man was now feeling fear for himself. He was well aware of what he had done to the boy. In fact, he enjoyed every bit of the torture he had caused him. But now, it seemed like all of his action had come back to bite him in the ass. The village thought that you died? He all but yelled out in disbelief. He was there when Naruto was dumped into the large body of water, and truly felt there was no coming back from something like that. Old man, you really are naive, aren't you? Naruto bit out coldly, sending a shiver down the old man's spine. Seeing me here, I'm sure you can guess what is going to happen next, correct? He spoke nonchalantly, as if the man's impending doom was nothing important. Please don't kill me, I'll do anything. He yelled out in desperation. He was old, and he knew he was incapable of doing anything to him. That one impact on his spine almost killed him by itself. He was about to continue his pleading before he was stopped by abrupt laughter. Ha ha ha, kill you? Why would I do that? And before the old man could feel a sense of relief, he was quickly brought down once again. You deserve much worse than death. You are scum that was capable of harming a child, to the point of attempted rape. You are disgusting. I doubt anyone would miss you even if you did disappear. Naruto continued to bring the old man down in this verbal torment, until the old man couldn't take it anymore. He already knew he was fucked, so he might as well get his last words in. Ha, you aren't a child. You're a spawn of a demon, and a constant reminder of our tragedy. You are the one who wouldn't be missed. I may be trash, but even trash is above monsters, you demon. He spat out as cruel as he could muster. If Naruto was angry at the man's response, it wasn't shown. He walked towards the old man with a piece of paper with strange characters in hand. And before the man could yell, he felt his body freeze as a paralysis seal was placed on his forehead. I'm afraid I can't have you yell or move while I am at work. He then practically punched his fist into the old man's mouth, shattering some teeth in the process. Muffled cries of pain from the old man could be heard as blood seeped from his gum down his chin, dripping onto the floor. Naruto then roughly yanked the man's tongue out, but not enough for it to be ripped from its confines. He raised a finger that began to glow a black light. Yin release. Mimicry method. Rather than a technique, it was a sealing method he had learned from the scroll through Yin release. It allowed him to recreate any seals he made from memory, giving it an instant casting ability. How long it took to be recreated depended on the complexity. The seal he was trying to recreate would only take a few seconds before creation. When Naruto's finger made contact with the man's tongue, a familiar, root, seal embedded itself onto it, and though it wasn't visible in appearance, he made slight adjustments to its design. Naruto then released his tongue, and pulled his body away from the old man. The old man was still paralyzed when he heard Naruto begin to speak. I just gave you a seal I used to have with some improvements of my own design. I didn't have a name for it, but I guess I'll call it the Seal of Damnation. He began while smiling darkly. With it, you will no longer be able to speak again. Every time you eat will feel like swallowing needles and taste like shit. Every time you drink will feel like drowning in fire. At the sound of what Naruto had done, he could only whimper in his paralyzed and pained state. If he thought that was all, he was about to be disappointed. If you even try to commit any form of suicide, point out the seal on your tongue or attempt to give any information about me, your body will become paralyzed in movement but will feel like you are being stabbed constantly, until you no longer feel suicidal or are no longer considered a threat to myself. And even if the seal was found, he then closed in on the old man once more, bringing his face to his before continuing. It would backtrack to the root organization, leaving me scot-free and damning a powerhouse of Konoha in the process. Tears began to drip down the old man's face, realizing he would now be tortured just from having daily necessities for living. Just by staying alive, he would be tortured endlessly. Naruto then grasped the man's neck and proceeded to choke him into unconsciousness, but not before saying one final piece. Sweet dreams, old man, because whenever you sleep, it will only be of you being raped by a carbon copy of yourself. With those last words, the old man fell into a slumber of nightmares while Naruto just watched his last look of terror. Standing from his position, Naruto remained stoic and cold, reflecting on his most recent action. He looked at his hands and thought to himself, the darker aspects of yin release is starting to show itself, and it's affecting even my actions. I'm really going to have to get to Kumo sooner rather than later. Naruto felt no regret for the old man, he had done plenty to deserve that seal. He was a frequent abuser towards Naruto, the most common one in fact. At times, he would do it every day. If Naruto did not have any form of training, he was sure he would have been raped already, and became nothing more than a rag doll for his personal use. He truly was a disgusting man with no hope for change. But even if he didn't feel regret, he knew he was becoming more influenced by the darker aspects of the yin release. He did not want it to reach the extent where it affected people he cared for, so he resolved to get it fixed. And the only way to challenge the darker side of his ability was to confront it directly, and he only knew of one place that could help. The Falls of Truth.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.